the SCG Tour. Zan Syed, team captain of Lotus Box. Edgar tearing it up, getting one of those at-large spots at the end of the year, showing just how consistent these two players have been.
For game 1, Edgar is on the play, Zan is on 6 cards. So we'll start out here with Arkham's Astrolabe. So on the early turns, what are you looking for?
Land drops. You just want to make sure that you actually are able to develop and start putting these cards onto the table. A lot of the things that you need to make sure that you're doing is just actually developing. You want your Oko to be able to start making food early. You want your Bitter Blossom to start making tokens on, say, the 2nd or 3rd turn instead of the 6th turn.
For Zan, it's a copy of Noble Hierarch. He does have some of these early mana creatures in his deck.
And the nice thing about Noble Hierarch and Gilded Goose in this deck is it almost feels like the old Deathblade decks we would see with Deathrite Shaman, where you have a slew of mana creatures and then just the most powerful 3-drops in the format.
Ponder here from Edgar. Early on, the removal from the Bant Snow deck that we can expect to see 4 copies of Swords to Plowshares. He gets those from white mana. Otherwise, this early mana from Zan should stay.
Right, and a lot of things are going to come down to what Edgar actually wants to expend resources on. Something like Noble Hierarch is one of the lower impact creatures that Syed is going to present. You would rather save Swords to Plowshares for something like a Leovold, if you can.
Back to Zan, now with the extra mana. An Arkham's Astrolabe of his own. So quickly we see both players setting up their mana in the matchup. Nothing more at the moment. See for Edgar here. Brainstorm leaving up a fetch land. Looks to be heavy on lands here and hoping to fix that on this turn.
Right, here Edgar really just wants to put some of these lands back, crack Windswept Teeth, shuffle them away, and get closer to having something more usable or something that he can actually snowball into an advantage.
So game 1 here, how do you feel about the card Force of Will? It's something that we see 4 copies of in Edgar's deck, 3 copies of it in Zan's. It is card disadvantage, which in a blue mirror you typically don't want, but it is a way to interact with an Oko.
Well, it's card disadvantage if you cast it for free. Otherwise, it can be a 5-mana, very expensive counterspell, which is something that we saw Joe Lissette doing earlier in the Players' Championship, was prioritizing the mana cost of those spells rather than the sort of cheaty pitch a card to cast it.
So do you shuffle them away early on?
Early on, I'd be inclined to shuffle them away, but because Edgar had so many lands, we're likely going to see those go back instead.
Go over to Zan's turn. And he will try for Icefang Coatl. Now, I want to talk about the counterspell suite we have in players' decks. On Edgar's side, the blue counterspells. He has 4 Force of Will, 2 Force of Negation, and then 1 green counterspell with Veil of Summer. And to be of note, he has 2 Teferis to close out the counter war.
Correct.
Zan, on his side, 3 Force of Will. That is it for counterspells, blue counterspells. He has 2 Veil of Summer and actually no Teferi. So with so few counters, I wouldn't be surprised to see Edgar just running out cards like Oko, Thief of Crowns.
Right. This is a spot where Edgar knows a lot of his cards are going to resolve. What he's going to want to be doing is, once he starts casting them, just be able to play several of them consecutively. That way he isn't just sort of running cards out and then having them immediately answered.
It is one of the reasons I think we have a slight advantage on the Sultai side. Because the trade-off of white versus black removal is that Edgar gets Swords to Plowshares and Zan gets Abrupt Decay, it means that cards like Oko, when they hit the battlefield, Zan can let them resolve and then remove them. On Edgar's side, he has to actually fight counter wars over this because Swords to Plowshares doesn't take care of the Planeswalker.
Right, and that's a spot where you're seriously exposing yourself to something like Veil of Summer.
A nod to it, Edgar does have 2 copies of Council's Judgment. It does answer Planeswalkers, but it is a mana more and a turn slower.
The bright side is that is a card that cannot be Veil of Summered.
Right. And a couple of different ways. I mean, it's a white card. Also, the Hexproof Council's Judgment is a way to get around a lot of things like protection and hexproof.
Exactly. It even has the luxury of not allowing Zan to draw a card off of something like Leovold.
Right now, players continue to trade cantrips. Some chip damage starting on the side of for Zan Syed. His Ice-Fang Coatl is exalting in now for 2. He has Edgar to 17.
It's starting to look like Edgar might still just have a ton of lands in his hand.
And that's even after a full brainstorm and shuffle away.
Sure, but sometimes the brainstorm draws lands and you can only put so many of those cards back.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he does here. Looks like he does have a copy of Oko, Thief of Crowns in hand. But it's not immediately clear if he wants to try for that. He's casting into open mana. It's one of the things where I'm very interested to see what he does because he knows Zan's light on counter magic.
Right.
Third basic land for Edgar. And with 3 basics, it does help Oko. He doesn't really need the Arkham's Astrolabe to stick around anymore.
Exactly. That's a lot of the benefit of having cards like Arkham's Astrolabe in your deck.
And here's the Planeswalker. The Thief of Crowns is the play for Edgar. 7 copies of this card between both decks. Has become the go-to Planeswalker in every format that it is legal. And Edgar not making a choice with it yet. If you're in Edgar's position, do you strongly suspect an Abrupt Decay is about to hit this?
Yeah, so you want to get some more material than just a food token. I'd be looking to generate a creature out of this Astrolabe.
And that's what he does. And exactly the play. The Abrupt Decay was there. Edgar makes the Astrolabe into an elk. So back to Zan we go. But now the pressure is roughly equal. We see a Coatl lining up against an elk. And now it is Zan who wants to find something more out of his deck. It's going to be his Brainstorm. And these exchanges, I want to talk about these exchange of resources we're seeing early on. So Oko for Abrupt Decay. We might see Coatl for Arkham's Ast for this elk. Both of those are even trades. As we go over time, is there a player who wants to do that more than the other?
So generally speaking, the Sultai Snow deck is going to be happier with these exchanges because it has more cards that actually generate resources. These are things like Bitter Blossom and Sylvan Library. These enchantments are things that Edgar only has so many real answers to that aren't just counterspells. So both players reducing their their resource count is going to favor the player who is better at recouping those lost resources.
We do figure that's Zan. Brainstorm here, putting cards back. We actually saw a neat thing in our first round, Zan using some of these new Eldraine cards. Gilded Goose plus Sylvan Library was one of his backbones in his match win over Joe Lissette. Something we're just starting to see in Legacy, but it really helped him manage that paying for life over and over.
Exactly.
And now it is Zan with the Oko. Just a blue mana up for Edgar. Or a white mana. He's not going to counter. Then we look at Edgar's counterspells. None of them cost mana. 4 Force of Will, 2 Force of Negation.
And it looks like Edgar fails the check here.
Yeah, and that's a lot more punishing on Edgar's side. He's not the Abrupt Decay player.
Right, and he's already kind of behind here. He only has 1 white source on the battlefield, so he's going to need to play at least another land to Council's Judgment this.
Swords to Plowshares. See, is in Edgar's hand. But Zan, actually, he was going to attack with the elk, and now is thinking twice about it. He passes. Actually, before attacks, it looks like it's going to be Swords to Plowshares on Noble Hierarch.
Interesting. So what this is going to do is make it so the elks are the same size during combat.
Right, so they can trade, and they will trade. Dual land here for Edgar. 3 mana. Means Council's Judgment. It is one of his 2 clean answers to Oko. Mentioned before, Zan doesn't really have counter magic for this. Veil of Summer can't protect Oko.
Right, if Zan has exactly a Force of Will.
And for the time being, the board is clean. It is 5 lands to 4 lands. Zan down a land, up an Icefang Coatl. Things are very close between the two. Question I have is, how is Zan doing on the mana front? Did not play 5th land, but he does go for a Bitter Blossom.
This is a big one, knowing that Edgar just cast that copy of Council's Judgment. It's attractive to go ahead and just jam one of your more powerful threats here.
Right, and there's these Council's Judgments, the 2 of them in Edgar's deck, are overloaded. Even with his 2 Snapcaster Mages, that's 4 Council's Judgments at most.
Right.
Edgar and Zan with 2 Bitter Blossoms, 4 Okos. You see, he has now earned the 2nd Council's Judgment, but that's it for Edgar.
Right, and you have to pull the trigger on something like this.
The enchantment is gone. And I think if you're Zan, this Sultai Snow deck, in a lot of ways, plays a mid-range game plan. I think you just keep running out your threats. Oko, Bitter Blossom, if you have another, let's go again.
Oh yeah, you just slam a spell on the table, say check to Edgar, and he passes or he loses. It's not a situation where any of these are going to be immediate losses, but these incremental advantages over time end up adding up in such a big way. There is no payoff card that's just worth more than the entire deck of the opponent here.
2nd Icefang Coatl from Zan. Both players here with the full play set of the card. And that 1 mana point chip per turn now turns into 2 points. Edgar's down to 13. And we see Zan just building an advantage. The big haymakers for Edgar's deck. 2 Jace the Mind Sculptor, 3 copies of Oko. Otherwise, no real finisher. We saw Joe Lisette with a Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Nothing like that from Edgar. As he continues. Just passes on 6 mana and continues to take damage. Edgar now down to 11.
And the scary part of all these Coatls, all these Astrolabes, is they're just generating material on Syed's side of the battlefield while also being up, just replacing themselves.
Sylvan Library from Zan. Now this is into 5 mana, but you do have to be wary. Zan plays 2 main deck copies of Veil of Summer. He can try to hardcast a Force of Will here, but if it doesn't work, a Veil would end things. And you see Edgar just draws the card.
Right, and with the Oko resolving before, you can also just kind of assume, unless it was the top couple of cards from Edgar, there isn't a Force of Will there.
Icefang Coatl from Edgar. That was the draw for the turn. This is main phase. Finds another land. And he'll say go. Sylvan Library, and a good 3 here from Zan is Brainstorm and Oko we see here.
I'll go to 8.
Yeah, it just takes all the cards. Especially with Oko's ability to make food tokens, you don't have to worry as much.
Right, and that's one of the drawbacks of playing something like Bant Snow, is you don't have a way to pressure Zan's life total adequately. This Sylvan Library is very frequently just going to be a 2 mana draw 3 or 4 that also stacks your library for a while.
And here's the Oko from Zan. And I love this. It's the 4th tap-out card we've seen from Zan, and Edgar already burned through both his Council's Judgments, just isn't in a position to keep fighting over these.
Right, he needs to have some sort of counterspell for this here, or the game's going to spiral.
It is going to be a hardcast Force of Will. And is it Veil of Summer from Zan? It is. And
oh, this is brutal.
you know, It's interesting, right? So there's not too much raw card advantage in these matchups because the decks are just so low to the ground. And it's one of those things where Veil of Summer, one of the new additions here, I want to say it's the most powerful counter spell in Legacy. And when I say that, I mean it's narrow, but you see games like this when it actually hits. It is 1 mana counter spell, draw a card.
It is 1 mana cryptic command.
Right, and that's, you look at these Traderix resources. The fact that Zan successfully Veil of Summer to Force of Will just is a
the
lights
game's over.
Yeah, it's lights out.
Yeah, it feels like this was the turn of the game. Everything was leading up to that interaction.
Yeah, and Zan down to 8, but you see already Respect putting food tokens into play with Oko. Attacks for 1, not trying to win the game too quickly here because he knows that with Sylvan Library and a food engine going, he doesn't need to.
Right. This is very similar to a lot of the Urza mirrors we'll see in Modern, where you don't need to prioritize winning. You'll get around to it. Here we see Zan is not going to really have to work very hard to close the game here.
Arkham's Astrolabe from Edgar. But at this point, it's not even clear what Edgar's trying to draw. See Teferi Time Raveler from Edgar. A fine card. Brainstorm response from Zan. Maybe trying to find a Force of Will.
Yeah, this is a spot where he could either be trying to find a force, or he just wants to go ahead and fire off the Brainstorm while he can still cast it. We have this fetch land at the ready to shuffle away any of the bad cards, but once this Teferi resolves, you can't cast Brainstorm or anything until your next main phase.
And Zan down to 7. Second Brainstorm here for Zan.
Alright, this does read like he's digging pretty hard for a Force of Will at this point.
Right, because there's not a cracked fetch land. The set Brainstorm actually doesn't do too much.
Exactly. This is him looking for a specific answer right now.
And we see Force of Will has been found.
Does he have the blue card?
Right, in his deck that's not always a given. He has a lot of non-blue spells.
Right, this feels like a black-green deck with some blue cards a lot of the time.
But Force of Will, and he found another Oko. So that is going to counter Teferi Time Raveler, and it will work, Zan to 7.
And this is Zan just doing whatever he can to stay ahead on the battlefield and not give Edgar an inch.
Back to Zan we go. 10 and 6. Life totals are whittling down here. We see on Zan's side with Oko, if things get too close, he can start sacrificing food. And draw here from Zan.
One of the risks you run if you end up paying too much life there is you just kind of put yourself in range to have to play in a way that you don't want to play. So when you feel like you've won the game, which I imagine that is around how Zan's feeling at this point, you don't want to do anything that gives Edgar that 2% chance of having the last 2 cards in hand be the exact perfects to deal with what Zan has.
Right. Yeah, there is one main deck copy of Brazen Borrower in Edgar's deck. Zan knows this from deck lists face up. He's at 5. It's got to be on his radar at this point.
Exactly. That if you're on Zan's side, that is your concern, and that is how you could end up losing this game.
Some flurry of end-step Borrowers and Icefang Coatls. Snapcaster Mages. Ponder here from Zan. Not great cards. Just think about shuffling them.
Yeah, this is one where the Force of Will is so attractive and he already has the resources that he wants, especially since he can hard cast this Force of Will, where you likely just keep the Force of Will to, hold his head under until the bubbles stop, so to speak.
And he will do that. And we see Edgar pick up the cards. So game 1 goes to Zan Syed. It's these non-blue permanents that Edgar just can't keep pace with. Manages the Bitter Blossom, but Sylvan Library does him in.
Right. It's a spot where Edgar ended up having to jam really early, but Zan's deck is better at adopting that role.
It was a matchup that Edgar was ready for. You see him go straight toward the sideboard. And we do want to look at the sideboard because I think there's a lot of options in here for Edgar. His deck is a reactive deck, and no matter what else happens here, that's how he plans to board and not really change things up. If we look at what he has a 3rd Snapcaster Mage. He does have a Palace Jailer. Don't know if we'll see that one. But 3 blasts, so 2 Pyroblast and a Red Elemental Blast. And also 2 additional copies of Veil of Summer to bring himself up to 3 total. So 3 Veils, 3 Blasts, a lot of anti-blue. He has a Supreme Verdict, a Surgical Extraction, 2 copies of Return to Nature, which very importantly
very much
can answer enchantments, and then a Sylvan Library. So those are all options here, I think. The only thing I really am sure we're not going to see is back to basics. But how do you reconfigure now to make sure that you can actually fight the fight you need to?
I like just putting a lot of these cards in the deck, to be honest. I'm not a huge fan of something like Sylvan Library because there's not very much going on in the graveyard, and the card is generally negative in terms of card advantage in the way that it plays. But things like Supreme Verdict can even help you just mop up the mana creatures that Zan presents. Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast are good against Oko, even if it resolves. And then they also stop Icefang Quaddle from cantripping.
So you said no on graveyard cards. That means no Surgical Extraction, but we do like Sylvan Library?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So one concern I have, though. 3 Pyroblasts, 3 Veil of Summer. Great for a blue mirror, but is this actually a blue mirror? A lot of Zan's payoff cards are not blue.
Sure, so a lot of the payoff cards are not blue, but you still do need to be able to answer the cards that Zan has. Not to mention, Veil of Summer is also a way that you can counter Abrupt Decay.
So you still all 6?
Yes,
okay.
Big fan of those cards.
That is true. The 3 Veils do counter Abrupt Decays. That does make a good case.
Yeah, big fan of how that exchange ends up breaking. The other thing that Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast counter that we didn't see much of that game, but can just take over a game on its own, is Leovold.
Right. Sure, 1 mana answers to 3 mana spells. So when we look at things to board out, because at this point we are looking, and he'll need the Volcanic Island. We're looking at him sideboarding in, it looks like 11 cards. So what comes out?
So the things that I am less excited about, I really don't love the cards with force in the name because they are ultimately just card advantage, and a lot of the things we're bringing in, like Pyroblast, Red Elemental Blast, Return to Nature, and so on, are going to serve a pretty similar role, right? Like Counterspell and Vindicate are not that different here. So I don't love those cards. Brazen Borrower is one that I could see leaning away from. Those are the first things that stick out here. We could also see him going lower on traditional spot removal, like Swords to Plowshares.
That's actually interesting. So yeah, lower on swords. I agree. The 6 counter spells are going to be out. And if I think you're on Zan's side, you kind of know that that's about to happen. But then cards 7 through 11, another 5 you have to sideboard out. You have a Supreme Verdict to get rid of. That's 1 out of 5. But then 4 more, that's trickier.
Yeah, and a lot of this could end up coming down to play draw, how you perceive the other person to be sideboarding. These are teammates, right? They didn't necessarily prepare for the event together, but it's possible that they have tested together in the past and have an idea of how the other person likes to posture. And some of these cards can just be completely different on the play versus on the draw. Palace Jailer is an example of something that is likely much better when you're more likely to be ahead on the battlefield.
Yeah, and I like your idea of cutting Swords to Plowshares. What I do want to then look at is whether Edgar can afford to do that. Because Zan does not have many creature threats in the main deck. We're going to now look at Zan's sideboard. Both players know this. And I think importantly, Zan has 0 creatures in his sideboard.
Right. A lot of what we see here is some respect. It's a little bit of cannibalization from within their team where we see these Leyline of the Voids despite nobody else in the tournament other than Lotus Box members bringing this Hogak deck to the table. This sort of crop rotation, Bojuka Bog, Caracas package is not going to do anything here. The big things we're going to be looking at here are Pyroblast, Red Elemental Blast again. Carpet of Flowers is likely going to be good enough, right? It's just a mana creature that is harder to deal with.
Yeah, we saw him bring it in against Joe Lissette, which I think means we'll see it again.
Right, and Flusterstorm is one where that card is frequently an uncounterable version of Dispel.
So with that, we see up to 8 cards coming in on Zan's side. That said, I don't see as much that I want to board out of Zan's deck. The 3 Force of Will, same reason. I'm fine to get rid of those, but there's not too much else I want to move away from.
Yeah, the only other thing I would really be looking at that I would think to get out are mana creatures. Noble Hierarch in particular strikes me as underwhelming, especially if we're looking to bring in Carpet of Flowers. It feels like those 2 cards serve similar roles, but Carpet of Flower translates into a longer game much better.
It's pretty interesting that in Zan's deck, and I agree with you here, that we're going to board out the Noble Hierarchs, but perhaps leave in the 2 copies of Gilded Goose.
Well, Gilded Goose produces material on the battlefield for Oko to turn into threats later on. It also can give you a bit of life gain to offset things like Bitter Blossom, Sylvan Library, where that sounds a little bit silly, but in a 20-turn game, Bitter Blossom adds up, right?
Right. Yeah, and we've seen that with actually Bitter Blossom and Sylvan Library. The fact that Goose is repeated life gain, it does seem important.
Yeah, exactly. We saw Zan at 8 life that game. Did you happen to keep track of how many times Edgar dealt combat damage? Because it was not 16 times. It was not 12 times.
Right. So I think we agreed and saw that Zan was advantaged in the first game. Do you think he is still advantaged after sideboarding?
I believe that I believe so. Fundamentally, Zan's deck is just kind of doing something that is posturing well against blue decks, and that hasn't changed very much. He was more advantaged in the first game because it felt like he was sort of pre-sideboarded for the matchup, but ultimately he still has these proactive hammers that it's on Edgar to be able to answer them.
Yeah, Edgar on a mulligan to 6 here, and I actually do think there's some concern in that. The way Edgar improves in this matchup is we saw this problem of overtaxing game 1, where Edgar had 2 Council's Judgments. He drew them both. Zan played a third thing that needed to be Council's Judgmented. Edgar doesn't have any. That problem after sideboard is more or less gone. He now has the correct removal to remove Zan's cards. But that allows him to play the same game, but it doesn't necessarily mean, if he's minus 2 cards, it doesn't help dig him out of that hole.
Right, and there's maybe even a chance that in a matchup like this, if you think Zan is going to be sideboarding out some number of mana creatures, you may even want to lean into being on the draw in a matchup this grindy, especially when you're bringing in all these 1-mana answers like Red Elemental Blast, Veil of Summer, etc.
Now it's interesting. Edgar now surveying his second hand. This is after a mulligan. And he will keep it. So on 6. And I like your idea of being on the draw. Edgar not pulling the trigger on it.
No,
but I do think it's close.
Right, and when you're playing something like Teferi Time Raveler, being on the play is quite strong. So I understand how he got here. I imagine he's put way more reps into this than I have, but it is certainly a thought experiment to at least consider.
So starting with Arkham's Astrolabe. Edgar is down 2 cards here, 1 for being on the play, 1 from the mulligan, but does have the advantage here, or the initiative rather, in game 2. So Zan doing his best to take it back. Turn 1 Gilded Goose will put him up to 3 mana.
Oof, up 2 cards and a mana.
And we see a pass. The mana accelerants. 5 mana creatures in Zan's deck. We'll see Astrolabe. And it's been interesting to me, both games we've seen Zan with a turn 1 mana creature and never really going for a 3 mana play, not like we see in Standard. It's been a lot of times turn 1 mana creature into Arkham's Astrolabe.
Right, and that's going to come down to the texture of Zan's hand and the fact that in Legacy, so frequently you just kind of want to know what order it's best to optimize casting your spells, right? So you want to play some of your cantrips that don't actually have decisions involved in them like Arkham's Astrolabe before you start sequencing those spells.
Just the Astrolabe and a pass for Zan. We go to Edgar. Just getting some mana set up. We'll see if he has an end-step play here. I believe we are on an end-step fetch.
Right, and it's looking like it'll just be a copy of Coatl here to try and recoup a little bit of Edgar's mulligan.
Sure. Get some material onto the board. Yeah, it is going to be Ice Fang Coatl. Does have to check at this point. Zan could red blast that sort of play if he wanted. And for Edgar, it's going to be making land drops. He's picked up Brainstorm. Leads on another Astrolabe. And these early turns, just the back and forth between the two players as they set up. And pass the Edgar sitting on at least one copy of Veil of Summer. And this actually shows a bit of weakness, I think, for Zan. He's going to he end step 8 a food with Gilded Goose to cast this Brainstorm.
Right, this feels to me like Zan is looking for something to just develop onto the battlefield. Edgar not having some 3-mana Planeswalker to cast that turn is something that Syed is going to want to capitalize on.
And now with full grip, deciding which 2 to put back. Now, Emma, interestingly, I see a Force of Will in Zan's hand. Not a card I was expecting here.
Right, and the thought here is likely just that Zan wants to make sure he has as many answers as possible for the haymakers that Edgar's presenting. Zan, with this low counterspell count, is going to struggle a little bit more post-board to answer those permanents with things like Abrupt Decay when Edgar has access to more Veil of Summer.
It actually looks like from the Brainstorm, Zan finds that he liked all but one of the cards. Normally you'd see him crack a fetch land there to reset, but he actually put 2 back, chose to draw 1, and then reset.
Embarrassment of riches.
Choosing to keep that Force of Will as well. So not only is it in the deck post-board, but it's a card he actively wants.
Right, and when you're not under any kind of pressure, using things like Sylvan Library as the most painful truths of all time,
yeah,
it makes cards like Force of Will as a 1-for-2 more realistic as well.
Big find for Zan. Cast an Astrolabe this turn and did find an Abrupt Decay. So has some insurance now against the non-Teferi Planeswalkers.
Right.
And a go. Does Edgar have anything like a second Coatl here? And this is the kind of post-sideboard play from these blue mirrors that this is what Legacy is here.
Oh, right. Both players just posturing and dancing as much as they can to develop the fanciest Elvish Visionary you've ever seen.
And has Death Touch so that it makes sure it trades with the other Elvish Visionaries.
Oh, that's how fancy it is.
When they trade, they really trade.
However, you think your creature's dead? I'll show you how dead your creature is.
Brainstorm here from Edgar. Interesting, he thought about end-step Brainstorming because he has 2 copies in the hand. Instead, he draws and main phase Brainstorms. His draw for the turn was another Misty Rainforest. So now 3 more cards. Both players here just reshaping their hands.
And the idea is, if mana isn't the squeeze here, and you think you just have a ton of time, drawing 1 card deeper is going to make your Brainstorm both more informed and give you more options.
Alright, so in a game like this, both players with not much going on. Zan has a Coatl, or Edgar has a Coatl, Zan has the ability to make food each turn. What is it you're actually looking for with Brainstorms? I know initially it was lands, but we're getting to the point where it might not be.
Here it feels like he's just trying to get some sort of game plan into place to figure out how he's actually going to win the game.
Coatl here from Zan. So when you say that, I'm looking at things like Jace the Mind Sculptor, perhaps.
Right, Edgar's trying to set up a situation where he gets one of these cards that's going to snowball a game-winning advantage, like we saw Syed do with Sylvan Library and Oko last game.
Right. On Zan's side, that makes sense. Bitter Blossom, Sylvan Library, Oko, all do that. On Edgar's side, he just doesn't have as many permanents that really do that. He has 3 Oko, 2 Jace. I mean, the other threat's 2 Teferi, but Teferi doesn't actually snowball.
Right. He also has his own copy of Sylvan Library out of the sideboard if he chose to bring that in.
Right. Back to Zan. Ponder from him. So I guess maybe make a board which Jace is safe on.
Yes.
But even then, to go for Jace, I think Edgar, how much mana would he want? 6, 7 before he tries for that?
We're talking multiple mana here.
Oh. Sylvan Library from Zan. So this is our first real attempt at card advantage. Edgar, since we've gone to sideboard, does have in his 75 2 copies of Return to Nature. See if one of those is end step. I'm sure he'd like to cast one here.
Between that, Council's Judgment, Snapcaster Mage being able to get them back later on, this feels like a perfectly fine spot to use one of those cards.
And that is exactly it. The Naturalize effect here on the end step does not want Zan untapping with that Sylvan Library. And now Zan has to choose whether he's fighting or whether he goes back into the holding pattern. And despite the force of will, he's not going to fight.
Right. That's just not impactful enough, and you run the risk of losing the game if you fight that fight, and Edgar just slams a Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this, the risk of losing the game-losing plays feel like resolve Jace. And is it fair for me to say just, if you get Veil of Summer, if you have this counter war, and at the end of Veil of Summer beats you in the counter war, you're done.
Right. You end up in a spot where both players have reduced their hand to very few answers. One player won this counter fight and ended up being up a card or two.
Right. And Edgar really trades down the board. Quaddles now are there. Full mana and lets Zan untap. Nothing doing so far.
Right. And the attractive thing about this line from Edgar's side of the battlefield is it makes it more likely one of these planeswalkers is going to stick around when he finds it.
What do you make of this? So Edgar has been brainstorming most turns here, and he just missed his 5th land. But with the amount of brainstorm and the cards we saw him get, this was a decision he made. He chose to miss the 5th land drop. Certainly he had the option to keep those cards.
Right. At this point, what I would be assuming if I were on Zan's side of the table trying to read Edgar, he didn't cast a threat, he missed his land drop, his hand is likely full of reasonable reactive cards here.
Sure. Has Edgar reached a point where he doesn't want more lands?
He may want 1, 2 more, but anything past about 6 is going to be some serious, Flood might be strong because Snapcaster Mage can make you pretty mana hungry, but for the most part, anything more than 5 is not really where Edgar wants to be.
I guess the idea is that Edgar puts lands back because eventually he will incidentally draw some lands. So he wants to shuffle them away and then naturally make his way to 6, if that sounds right.
Yes.
We go to Edgar. It doesn't look like he wants to miss a pair of land drops, however. So you see Zan missing land 2 as well. So now you see Edgar main face brainstorming, and maybe he's looking for some land this time.
Yeah, or just some way to justify a real threat, or a threat that he can justify putting onto the battlefield. Ideally, you can have something like a Teferi with a Veil of Summer to protect it from an Abrupt Decay on Zan's turn in a way that Zan can't effectively fight against, especially since Zan doesn't have anything on the battlefield right now to attack it, and Edgar could just turn it into more card advantage by bouncing his own copy of Arkham's Astrolabe.
And actually, after the brainstorm, still no land drop from Edgar. And we go back to our holding pattern here. On Zan's side, I mean, he is going to start netting a food token each turn with Gilded Goose, which is a mana source for the first one.
Right. Zan built a land drop.
Speaking of mana sources, here's Noble Hierarch. If the game truly gets into a holding pattern, then Edgar will have to answer this Hierarch at some point.
Right, and Hierarch is something that can attack that Teferi we've seen hiding out in Edgar's hand.
Back to Zan we go. He's drawing his first of 2 cards that he put back from Brainstorm. So it looks like he had one he wanted. Now he cracks a fetch land, shuffling away the second. I believe the one he drew this turn was Ponder. So I really want to point at some micro-sequencing here. He could have kept the Ponder in his hand last turn, cracked the fetch land, and pondered. He could have done this a turn earlier, but it would have brought him down to 2 mana instead of 3, and something about Edgar's hand has made him decide that's not acceptable.
Right, he also just wants all of these cards.
Top cards, we see Veil of Summer. I do believe we see a land in here.
I think it was Veil, Ponder, Astrolabe.
And Edgar just wants lands?
Yeah, he's really digging for those lands here.
Right, all these reactive counter spells, if you're up against mana creatures, don't actually do much. I mean, Zan can just hang out, make food tokens, attack with Noble Hierarch, just do the smallest of plays.
Right, and Edgar's just doing whatever he can to play cards at this point, because he is behind on the battlefield, and Zan is starting to just pull ahead a little bit in the resource war.
7 cards in hand for Edgar, no lands. A really interesting pickup for him that turn was a copy of Supreme Verdict.
Right, and against these 2 mana creatures, this eventually is going to be a 2-for-1 ideally.
Yeah, but it feels like he wants to have 6 or 7 lands before he makes that happen.
Correct. You don't want to just completely shields down cast this Supreme Verdict unless you have something that can answer whatever Zan does afterwards.
Does have a Council's Judgment in hand. All of this, if he had 6 lands, would make sense and be fine. But at this point, it is about making land drops.
Correct.
On Zan's side, not really progressing the board anymore, but he's fixing his hand. You saw a Brainstorm, a fetch there to shuffle away the cards, now an Arkham's Astrolabe. And it looks like there's Sylvan Library in Zan's hand. Zan has a 6-card hand at the moment. And he might go for that play and protect it with Force of Will. Now, the downside here is that Edgar has a 7-card hand with no lands, and he is letting Edgar trade down his hand.
Correct. At this point, you're not always incentivized to actually play into a control player who has a ton of cards in their hand, especially if it's going to reach a point where they're missing land drops and they may just go to their discard step.
Zan casts Sylvan Library, though. It does resolve. He passes. We should see some action. Snapcaster Mage from Edgar, but there is the Return to Nature in the graveyard, but not enough mana for it. So this would just be for a Brainstorm, I believe.
That is what it looks like.
Edgar casts Brainstorm. Zan has to be happy about this. And Zan will Flusterstorm the Brainstorm. Now, Edgar is not Brainstorm locked. The top card of his deck is a random one. He had a Ponder, and it looks like he found a land.
Just what the doctor ordered.
Yeah, and he gets Zan to tap down, too. I like this for Edgar.
Well, there's still 2 mana on Syed's side.
There's still 2 mana. Oh, goodness. Just kidding. Question is whether Edgar has a way to deal with Sylvan Library. He's used one of his Return to Natures. He used one of his 3 Snapcaster Mages. He has 2 Council's Judgments, and those are actually pretty clean because most of Zan's cards can't interact. So Edgar will use both Astrolabes, and he will Council's Judgment. He's going to go for the Sylvan Library. Is Zan willing to fight a Force of Will fight over this?
It depends what the rest of his hand looks like. If Zan thinks that he can answer something that comes down from Edgar or one of these bigger spells, then he might fight over it. But if not, he's probably just going to let this go.
And he lets it go. I think because Edgar had so many cards in hand, there's just too likely if he fights that he's going to lose to a Red Blast, a Veil of Summer. And when he starts losing there, it gets worse. Exactly.
And Edgar's been spinning his wheels a ton with Ponders, with Brainstorms, and missed land drops.
Something has to be in his hand.
Exactly.
Yeah, yep. So you start in your play like Zan. In your head, you start checking boxes of Edgar didn't do X, he didn't do Y. What cards could be in his hand?
Exactly.
If you look at it, things Zan has not done. He has not played a counter spell that could be Veil of Summered. He has not played a blue spell that could be Red Blasted. Okay, those seem like very likely candidates.
Exactly. So those are the cards we're going to see Zan play around here.
And now, with Snapcaster Mage, both players trading some damage. Zan still, though, gets those food tokens each turn. For Edgar, we might see some aggression. Is this Oko? It's not. It's the other Planeswalker. It's a Fairy Time Raveler. This should get the Force of Will out of Zan's hand.
Right. Force of Will does not have a text box if this resolves.
Right.
But if Zan has, say, an Abrupt Decay, he might prioritize using that on it.
Well, he'd have to do that. He'd untap and do it. But yeah,
Correct.
and that actually works. Zan, and I love this, hard cast Force of Will, not a 2-for-1.
Big fan of this line from Syed.
You see Edgar with a Veil of Summer at the ready. But if he wants to protect Teferi with that Veil from an Abrupt Decay, then he would need to fetch and Red Blast here. And with that, there's another thing I want to mention. There's only one Volcanic Island in Edgar's deck, and Zan does play Wastelands, which means there is a bit of a cat and mouse here. Now, Zan has some Astrolabes to maybe make muddy this up too, but there is a point where the Red Blasts get weird.
Right, and we see Edgar just leaning into Veil of Summer here, taking his value where he can get it.
Yeah, I mentioned before, the one mana Cryptic Command is pretty hard to argue with.
Exactly, that's just such a favorable exchange. 1 mana and replace itself for 5 mana.
And on Teferi's side, you see actually Edgar just value playing the Teferi. He -3s to bounce his own Snapcaster Mage. It means this Planeswalker can be attacked down by Noble Hierarch, but still a great setup for Edgar.
3 mana, create a Snapcaster Mage, draw a card. Just fine.
Yeah, and win a Veil of Summer fight.
Yes.
Just if he has a way to protect here. Noble Hierarch swings, and it looks like Edgar's going to fight.
Oh yeah, you don't double fetch here for nothing. I assume there's an Ice Fang Quaddle about to come down.
Two mana here. Still could be the Quaddle, thanks to Arkham's Astrolabe. And you're absolutely right. Here comes a blocker. It does have Death Touch, so we'll trade with the Noble Hierarch if we reach that point.
Oh, there's a Teferi Time Raveler. We're gonna get there.
Oh, we're just reaching that point. Yeah, they trade. Zan does not have any effects.
No.
Nice card. And Abrupt Decay does finish it off.
And
so
this is an exchange that is still a win for Edgar.
I mean, the Quaddle traded. Yeah, there's a lot to like here. Now you're seeing Zan, knowing he's behind, he's starting to tap out for things.
Right, and Edgar also no mana available.
Yep. And that's what you'll see in a Blue Mirror. Once a player starts losing, they can't play the holding pattern anymore. They start jamming all their threats. They hope that one of them, their opponent, wasn't, that there were cracks in the wall, that you can sneak something through. If Edgar cleanly answers things, something like here, like Red Blast, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Edgar can really pull ahead.
Right.
I like on Zan's side making an Elk. He doesn't want a Jace to just free roll this. He knows about a Snapcaster Mage in Edgar's hand. We know about a Red Blast, a Supreme Verdict, a Swords to Plowshares. It's a full 7-card hand, so there's more. I believe a Council's Judgment. So we look at ways that he can answer it. There's just a ton.
Right. At this point, it's not a matter of if, it's how.
Yeah. Looks like he has an Oko of his own. Yeah.
Edgar just figuring out how to optimize all of these cards.
Yeah, we can go back to the beginning. So Edgar, both Planeswalkers, yes, Oko and Jace. He's going to go for the Red Blast to take care of Oko. So, 2 Planeswalkers, Oko, Jace, 2 removal spells, Swords and Supreme Verdict. Don't know that he has more counter spells. I believe it's all mid-range.
And that's a lot of what you're going to see players posture around as they lean out of counter spells. When there are a bunch of Veil of Summers, it's so easy to get punished for playing these cards that are conditional on when you can cast them, because your opponent then kind of gets to choose to not expose themselves to something like a Force of Will until there definitely is going to be a Veil of Summer.
Edgar chooses not to follow up with a Planeswalker yet. He just passes. Zan attacks for 3 and passes back. It's time for Snapcaster. It is. This is interesting to me. I somewhat expected Edgar to Swords to Plowshares away the Elk, but you see some real patience on his side.
Right, and he's at a high enough life total where he can kind of just use it as a resource.
And look at this. A Brainstorm off Snapcaster Mage for Edgar finds another Oko, a Quaddle, and I believe a Return to Nature. So pretty good set of cards, and the Aquata will draw him back one of them.
And Edgar's just starting to pull away with this. All of his creatures having draw a card stapled on them has just been the defining feature of this game.
Yeah, Edgar still has to make sure the cleanup works, but so far we like this. And you see the strength here, and this is out of the sideboard, Palace Jailer from Edgar. And now, if you want to talk about some card advantage, he is going to make himself the Monarch with this 2/2 white creature. That's going to get around most of the counter magic that Zan can play. It also has a converted mana cost of 4.
Oh, yeah.
Arkham's Astrolabe, the Elked Astrolabe is gone. Edgar becomes the Monarch. And this is what we were expecting to see post-board, because Edgar has the ability to trade with cards now. We had Bread Blasts for Okos, we had Return to Natures for a Sylvan Library.
Right, at this point, Edgar's just interested in locking the game down for as long as possible.
Right, he never actually needs to make a move.
Correct. This is what it's going to allow him to adopt a reactive role against a strategy like Syed's. It's just a steady stream of cards.
Yeah, Zan draws up to 4. You see Edgar, it's either a 6 or 7 card hand, and Zan knows that the corner has turned. He cannot grab the Monarch token back, and with that, he knows he will never run out of Edgar out of cards, and we have evened the game score at 1 game apiece.
Right, it's very clear when Edgar missed those few land drops. Still has 6 cards in hand, is getting another card each turn. The writing's just on the wall. Rather than sitting there and losing the game for another half an hour, he's just going to preserve his mental health a bit.
So players look back over the sideboard. Do you think there's some play-draw dependency here?
It would not surprise me if that were the case. You know, we still saw some things like Noble Hierarch in Syed's list. That was likely a concession to the fact that he knew in these counterfights you need to make sure you actually have mana available to you. And if you're behind on mana, that can be a very real detriment, especially when this sort of tap-out strategy is going to put you in a spot where you're forced to commit on your turn before Edgar is.
And I actually want to look at that, because Zan had both Noble Hierarch and Gilded Goose in the deck, and he still had Force of Will in the deck, almost like his Game 1 plan. I was not impressed with the mana creatures there. Zan had one on the first turn, and Edgar didn't care.
Did you see how many times that Gilded Goose tapped for mana?
Yeah, how many times did we did Edgar care? None?
Oh, my silence is pointed.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if it got to it, Edgar was 9 life higher at the end of the game. But that's not what it's about.
Exactly. And there's certainly a spot where if Zan was able to stick an Oko, something like Gilded Goose can end up mattering. But Noble Hierarch in particular is one that I think we're going to see Syed move away from going into this third game, especially when he's already on the play. That means that he's going to have the mana advantage because of how the game works.
For Zan Syed, the Sultai Snow player here of Team Lotus Box, this is his first Players' Championship, making it to the top 4. He is the Player of the Year on the SCG Tour from 2019.
Yeah, absolutely. He's just been playing Magic on the tour basically every weekend this year, even grinding out the invitational qualifier scene just to lock up that Player of the Year spot.
Most dominant on the tour this year, collected the most points, making it into the top 4. He's one of the top players here. And really, you know, we see 3 players up in the field: Zan Syed, Oliver Tomajko, and Edgar Magalhaes. These all have been the best players all year.
Unsurprised that these are the 3 players that we are watching here at our final event.
Mention here, this is, for those of you joining us, this is our semifinals. It is the best of 3 best of 3s. So, Legacy, Modern, Standard, all on the table. This is the first match for the players.
We can just make it sound like a remix, you know? Best of 3-3. Get some air horn sounds.
It's a recursive function. It's nice. Zan looking back over the list.
Yeah, you just want to cover your bases. In a situation like this, there are 2 matches, well, depending on how you define a match, between 2 and 6 matches between you and hoisting the belt. capital T, capital B, the belt.
I didn't see a sideboard card out of Zan that game.
He cast Flusterstorm.
You're right. He cast Flusterstorm.
Other than that, though, I agree. I would really like to see Pyroblast out of Zan.
Yeah, and I have to think they're in here. Edgar's mostly blue cards.
Agree.
But some of the cards I mentioned, I was surprised to see Force of Will still in the deck.
Mm-hmm. And that's likely just a concession to those big haymakers that Edgar has. I think that Zan really just needs to lean into his role as the tap-out strategy and try to make that work for him here, rather than trying to have these big 5-mana counter spells.
Yeah, what I didn't like in that game was when we got into the spot where they both had 4 lands and Zan just started making food each turn. I don't know that he has another line, but I don't know that type of gameplay favors Zan.
Right, that's a spot where Zan's going to end up with this short-term advantage in terms of on-battlefield permanence, but food does not matter if your opponent is going to be able to keep your Oko in check.
All right, underway for our final game of Legacy, the semifinals. Both players on 7. Last time Edgar actually on a 6-card hand did manage to win.
Funny thing about Ice Fang Coatl and Snapcaster Mage and Arkham's Astrolabe and...
If both players just play lands for a while and start drawing cards, eventually we saw actually in that game, both players had lots of cards in their hand at the end of the game.
Right, that was a spot where it was all about what was on the battlefield.
So some setup to start Zan with Ponder, no mana creature. If the mana creatures are still in, certainly you want to try to hit them early.
Right, not having a mana creature is actually something that I would say is a good thing here, because it implies that Zan doesn't have them in his deck.
Yeah. We're happy to not see one here. You're hoping we don't see one at all. But they are still in. Here's Zed. Here is Noble Hierarch. And it might not be the default strategy for a blue mirror, but it's coherent, right? If what Zan believes that he doesn't win the straight blue mirror, then he has to outmuscle his opponent before Edgar's online. And a way you can do that is with extra mana and lots of tap-out permanents, and we see that with Sylvan Library.
Right, and that's a good point. Another thing that Noble Hierarch does that I don't think we've really talked about yet that is important is it makes your Oko Elks able to attack into other Elks effectively.
And I just want to talk about how much I like this library play, jamming from Zan, because he's on the play. Edgar's answers to this, which would normally be Return to Nature and Council's Judgment, are cut in half because there's not time for Council's Judgment.
Right, and this is also a matchup where if he doesn't have that Return to Nature, this Sylvan Library runs the risk of basically just being a draw 3 or more.
Yeah, and we see a turn 2 Brainstorm from Edgar means Zan will get to untap with this library. So the damage is done.
Exactly.
Zan's card draw spell resolves. It means that he'll start at 11, but on the play he gets a 2-mana divination that continues to do work later on.
Oh yeah, I would happily start at say 10 life in a blue mirror to just get to draw 2 free cards.
See with Zan, plenty of Veil of Summers. We see Veil of Summer, Red Blast, Supreme Verdict in hand, all reactive cards. And fetches away 2 cards he doesn't want. Some high velocity play for him to use this Brainstorm fast and to reset the deck does make me think he's looking...
This reads to me as desperation.
Yeah. If you find the Return to Nature next turn, is it still worth hitting the library?
Yeah, because it can just do the same thing the following turn.
Okay. Yeah.
That's just going to give a ton of advantage over the course of the game. We can maybe see something like Teferi Time Raveler to try and buy some time by just bouncing it.
Ponder from Edgar. Jace the Mind Sculptor in the top. Does that matter?
Not really. Not at this point of the game. That's something where Edgar would want to reduce both players' resources a bit before actually developing it.
Yeah, and you mentioned some desperation here, Edgar, now with the shuffle off the Ponder.
Edgar really just looking for some sort of Council's Judgment, Return to Nature, anything like that here.
Yeah. The Ponder, the shuffle, Edgar trying to find something that changes what the board looks like. He draws the Jace anyway. It looks like that's where the Planeswalker wants to be. And now, Zan's top cards. Decay 2 lands.
That might
Maybe
be
he
a
wants them
Leovold.
all. And he does it. Yeah. Oof.
Leovold
might be a Leovold.
would be
Oh.
such a huge pickup here for Syed.
Yeah, 2 copies. That is in the deck. We have not seen it in either of the first 2 games. But I love this Zan embracing the tap-out game plan.
Slam.
Right.
Must answer permanent. Must answer permanent. Keep the hits coming.
Yeah, we saw him lose the game 2 that played out like a control mirror, and this is far more his deck's speed. Now, is it a Leovold? It might not be. This might just be... Oh, just kidding. Carpet of Flowers. Okay, this is even more tap-out.
That's what we call a freebie.
Right, this makes the blue mana. And thanks to the tropical island here, everything is set up. He can still Leovold. And that's the play. Can Edgar get out from under this? It is hard.
Edgar, he has come to bargain.
Yeah. Now, Edgar does have a Supreme Verdict in hand, and that's a card that cleanly answers Leovold.
Well, in a minute.
Right, it's good there. He's limited in what he can do before then, but, you know, it's better perhaps than red blasting a Leovold and some of the other options available.
Right.
I did mention the Supreme Verdict. To be fair, Brainstorm was resolved since then, so it might still be in the hand.
Right.
It was there when he started.
We could see Edgar leaning into something like Council's Judgment here.
Which card would you judgment? Leovold or the Sylvan Library?
A fine question, Matthias.
Yeah. One that Edgar will tell us the answer to if he selects that line.
Right. So here it'll kind of come down to what the rest of Syed's hand looks like and what Edgar thinks he can beat versus not beating.
Right.
If he just has a pile of spot removal in his hand, he may just have to go after the Leovold here.
How do you feel about Oko elking the Leovold?
Fine.
Yeah, I mean, Zan gets a card,
Fine.
but in a certain sense, when your opponent has an onboard Sylvan Library, what's another card? They already have a lot of those.
Sure.
And Edgar chooses the line he's just going to pass. Back to Zan we go. Top cards, Oko, Red Blast, and one other. He's at 10, so likely can't take all of these. It doesn't want to get into range where end-step Brazen Borrowers kill him.
I mean, I think someone who's not a coward could take all of them.
Oh, goodness. You take 2 of them. You can take 2 and use your fetch land. What are we talking about? Zan, I think down to 6. Yeah.
Let's see if Edgar has this surprise Brazen Borrower.
Would love it. I don't know that the borrower is even in the deck.
It
might have been boarded
It
out.
probably is not.
Carpet of Flowers adds mana equal to the number of islands.
And we're going to see this start to net mana for Zan now. Last turn, it was mana neutral. This turn, he's just up.
It's like a land.
Exactly.
For now. Might get better. Probably will.
Love it when my lands get better.
And I don't think that's a card that Edgar ever really fights over. He just has to let Carpet of Flowers happen.
Right. Mana is not the resource fight that you are fighting from Edgar's seat.
All right. Leovold was in play, and now Oko, the play from Zan. Edgar will fight. It is Red Elemental Blast.
Not going to veil that one.
No, you cannot. In fact, does Zan have any counter magic in his list?
Flusterstorm.
Okay. And that would be for 3. That would work. Veil of Summer. He can do that. That doesn't work.
Oh. Oh, no.
Reading Veil of Summer. Edgar has not cast a blue or black spell, so Zan will not draw.
Oh, okay.
Spells you control. Spells you control can't be countered this turn.
Okay,
he doesn't get the card, but he does protect the Oko.
Sure.
There we go.
I'm too used to that not working against something like Aether Gust.
Yeah, I mean, with the way the rest of the card is, you almost feel like it says spells you control can't be countered by black or blue effects this turn or something like that.
At this point, I'm just going to assume that I show my opponent a Veil of Summer when they play a card, and my Veil of Summer wins.
And it works?
I don't...
Whatever works means.
Exactly. Our ace is high or low, whatever they want to be.
I want to be like, someone says, okay, I'll attack for lethal, and she'll be like, Veil of Summer. I'm like, you had it.
Oh, God, that card's so broken.
It's like... Wait, you mean it doesn't fog?
Well, I could have sworn.
I mean, it might as well also fog damage. Back to Edgar we go. So now Zan with the Oko. He made a food token that turn, and the mid-ranging on Zan's side just continues. on Edgar's side.
And there's not any sort of planar cleansing effect that we're going to see out of Edgar's deck.
No, he has to answer these one at a time. And on all likelihood, he has to answer the Leovold first, because if he does it any other way, he gives Zan a card.
Well, Council's Judgment can get around that.
Okay.
So it's possible he Council's Judgments the Oko here.
He could Palace Jailer. And that's the play. All right, this is an interesting one. This is the line of, oh, so you want to mid-range, I'll allow it.
And this is risky. This is so risky. This is a spot where this is likely going to take that Leovold, drawing Zan a card, and if Zan has a removal spell for this Palace Jailer and gets to attack with an Elked Food,
we're done.
Yeah, that's just, then Syed's going to get to draw extra cards every single turn and get the Leovold back.
The question I have, though, is what is the removal spell? I mean, he has one Assassin's Trophy, but Abrupt Decay doesn't hit it. He doesn't have Jace the Mind Sculptor to unsummon it. Now, there's some issues, right? Edgar becomes the Monarch, but an Elked 3/3 means Zan will probably become the Monarch. Edgar's on the game plan right now of, Zan, you can have however many cards you need. I need to stay alive. I'll figure it out later.
Well, so Zan doesn't actually have that many true removal spells that get a Palace Jailer off the battlefield, so this is going to at least be worth a chump block against that Elk.
Right. So Palace Jailer, you think you would? Yeah, you'd chump here?
Yeah, you would probably just chump, because the Leovold stays exiled.
Leovold stays exiled, right. This isn't Banisher Priest.
Exactly. It's easy to get this, Deputy of Detention, all of those variants mixed up. This is a much different card.
Right. And then Edgar has a Supreme Verdict, maybe, to... What Edgar's just going to try to do then is protect the Monarch.
Right. This is a spot where you're just trying to actually get a couple of cards each turn that way.
Swinging with the Elk.
Oh, and this has got to feel so good from Edgar's side.
I love this setup from Edgar.
He's going to get to draw at least one more card off of this Palace Jailer.
Yeah, Zan to 5. Now, Zan has a 5-card hand. Edgar has loaded Zan up on cards, but he has gained the Monarch, which means he might just be able to keep pace. Gilded Goose from Zan, but does that matter? If Edgar has Supreme Verdict, it just might not.
Well, so even if he did, then Oko can just Elk this food. Now, Edgar really needs to answer two things. He needs to deal with this Oko, as well as the 3/3 Elk that's on the battlefield.
Veil of Summer, not actually a fog. Would be great as a fog here. But Ponder from Zan. So how does he keep the Monarch token then? We're looking at Icefang Coatls?
Icefang Coatl, very attractive option at this spot. Just anything that can stop attackers. Swords to Plowshares does it. Say, Supreme Verdict plus Swords to Plowshares is a 1-2 punch.
Right.
Is a way that we could see him keeping it for another turn. And a lot of times you're comfortable expending a ton of resources to stay the Monarch because it also pads your total resource count.
Yeah, they are, every turn you buy, you get another card, so you're not even spending resources.
Exactly.
I think the hard part here is that Edgar has to spend all his mana to answer the board, and he has to basically ignore Zan's hand and hope there's nothing there that messes this up.
Well, so to a point, Syed's deck is not actually very good at literally attacking.
Right. 1 mana off Carpet of Flowers. Edgar, fetching up non-islands, trying to make blue mana through Astrolabe to keep that carpet under effect. And Edgar saying, "Hey, Carpet of Flowers, I believe that's your during your main phase. Okay, it's during your main phase."
The Oracle text just may be something wild.
Yeah, and they're going to call a judge whether that's going to be an interesting one. We will check that out. The text on Carpet of Flowers. So we can show you the card here, but that is not what it does. I think the question they have is whether or not in the second main phase. And here's how it reads in the Oracle. At the beginning of each of your main phases, if you haven't added mana with this ability this turn, you may add X, where X is the number of islands. So Zan can, at the beginning of first main or at the beginning of second main, say, this is my Carpet of Flowers main phase.
Right, and I believe the question is if he had done anything in his second main phase yet, because it is something you have to do at the beginning.
Well, we'd cast Gilded Goose post main. And I think if you don't declare it in either main phase, I'm not sure that Zan's going to get the mana. And Zan passes. So, can Edgar maintain the monarchy? That's going to be the question here.
And it feels like a lot is riding on this.
If possible, he'd like to play cards that cannot be red blasted and cannot be Veil of Summered. But that's a lot to ask.
Tall order.
I like you said, Supreme Verdict, land, Swords to Plowshares is the dream. But I don't think he has. I think we're starting on Teferi Time Raveler, and that's going to get a red blast.
Well, maybe Edgar has a Veil of Summer.
You see, Teferi Time Raveler. Zan, Dread Elemental Blast. Veil of Summer from Edgar. It's the exact same interaction we saw. He's not going to draw the card, but his spells are uncounterable.
I've seen this movie before.
So I just stayed in the theater, saw it a second time. Red Blast, countered on resolution, Teferi in play. Now Zan can't cast anything. But Edgar's not alive, just not yet. There, so he bounces the Elk token, draws a card.
Needs a Swords to Plowshares.
Yeah, needs
so bad.
A way to keep that Monarch token. I mean, he can play his land and hope that Monarch token draws him a Swords. And that would be the biggest draw if he can do it. He draws and it's a land. I think he missed.
This is huge.
It's a huge miss. And
Edgar
now he's
doesn't
going to
have a way
lose
to
it.
get it back.
Right. If Zan becomes the Monarch, that might win
I think
the
this
first
was
match.
the turn.
You see another Red Blast and an Oko. Zan gonna stay at 5, draws. Believe in Astrolabe. Carpet of Flowers here. Gets 1 mana. Right, and because if Zan becomes the Monarch, then Leovold is back in play.
Right, and that's just such an incredible holding position.
Arkham's Astrolabe. If Zan, I know it's because the Monarch comes back. I was going to say if Edgar responds with Supreme Verdict, is it enough? But I don't think so.
No, and there's a spot where even as long as Zan has that Leovold, even if Edgar gets the Monarch token back, he doesn't get anything from it. Zan does.
He has to kill the Leovold first,
Exactly.
then become the Monarch.
It just adds probably too many boxes for Edgar to check.
And Edgar hoping maybe Zan doesn't attack, but that's not going to happen.
Second main phase, no takebacks.
That food token becomes an elk. Edgar had to play to a slim line there to find the Swords. 2 mana on Zan's side. A second Oko. He wants to be sure. And I think Gilded Goose is becoming an elk as well, and it is.
This is real heads up.
Yeah,
from
he
Zan.
says I don't even want to lose to the Swords to Plowshares if you have it.
Exactly. This is a super, super nice play here from Zan.
And both these are going to go at Edgar. No, not going to bother with the Teferi. Zan wants to become the Monarch. And this will do it. Here's the swing. Edgar will go to 9. And Zan will grab both those cards. Both the Monarch token and the Leovold. Edgar to 14. Is there a card that does does this? I don't...
I am not sure. I have to see something impressive here. It looks like this is just going to be something like a brainstorm before the Leovold comes back into play.
Looks like it as well. Here is the Brainstorm. 3 cards for Edgar. Supreme Verdicts in them.
Okay, that's something.
That is the card I think he wants.
Yeah. He just needs something like a Coatl in order to be able to attack.
Yeah, I'll give you this. He has a Teferi. The Teferi's going to survive. So what happens if we get a plus on Teferi, says go, instant speeds the Supreme Verdict, end steps a Coatl?
Sure.
Becomes the Monarch back. I mean, Zan will have a lot of cards. There's work to be done.
Sure. I buy that being a way to make this happen.
brainstorm from Zan. But Zan, I mean, the Supreme Verdict this next turn is a must.
Yes.
And we see a Pyroblast from Zan. So even if you put together a line like that, I guess if you do it on end step, Zan can't Pyroblast the Coatl. Teferi's still in play.
We'll likely see the Teferi get Pyroblasted.
Just right now?
Yeah.
That is going to be it. You are absolutely
Assuming
right.
he has another red source. Oh, there's an Astrolabe. There's always a red source.
Legacy is these snow decks.
You love it. Why wouldn't my Underground Sea cast my splash color? Normal stuff going on.
And I like
here.
this from Zan to blast this main phase. This turn, rather. Yeah. And it is gone. Cleared board here, which means Edgar has to main phase the Supreme Verdict.
Admittedly, Zan does not have much life.
No, he can't. The Sylvan Library is now just rearranging things. And Supreme Verdict from Edgar. It was a must, but he had it. Step 1.
That is the way to stay in this match.
There's still an Astrolabe there, so Oko can continue the pressure. Sylvan Library rearranges. Now 2 islands in play for Edgar, so that Carpet of Flowers gets an extra. Abrupt Decay on top for Zan. I like that one a lot.
A lot of things to like about Syed's position here. He has this Oko. He has a Sylvan Library to make sure he never runs out of gas. He's so close to taking down the first match on the road to the finals.
Declares it's 2 black mana. Zan says, I'll be spending it. I'll be spending it on a Bitter Blossom.
That's a nice one.
That's
a
4.
big deal.
Yeah, this is neat. So Zan now +1's the Oko, makes the Astrolabe into an Elk. Elk's going to swing, so we are going to be at 5 and 4. The game is going toward its conclusion.
One way or another, this is where it's happening.
Passes. Does Edgar have a Coatl? He would really like to have one. He does not. But upkeep, he fetches to 4. Both players. Low on life. No life gain on Zan's side just yet. Could something work? Zan missing Monarch. And you know what? That's what happened here. He passed the turn. I think Edgar noticed it and said, rather than... you ask, why did he fetch upkeep instead of fetching end step?
Well, that's just something you do in Legacy, generally speaking, while you have more mana available, since you aren't having to do anything like get a tapped shock land,
Yep, and I think it depends what was said here. You see Ricky Hayashi here, being the table judge here, asking players ask whether we've progressed past that Monarch point. It could be a big miss for Zan.
Yeah.
You can't move another player through their phase, but if they say go and you see Zan says, yep, okay, you got it. Zan, he is the type of player, though, who is excellent at rebounding from that. Jace the Mind Sculptor. Pyroblast.
Oh.
Doesn't matter. Jace is gone. Edgar. Land. Oko. Hold on. Is this lethal? Is this lethal?
Oh my god.
Did Edgar do it? Elk swings in. Zan to 1. There's a Bitter Blossom in play for Zan.
This did not just happen.
And he Iceman Coatl. He has the blocker. Okay. I say draws an Abrupt Decay. Abrupt Decay is the Astrolabe.
This means that Zan has lethal.
That means Zan has lethal. There's an Elk. There's a Coatl.
Oh my
and
god.
He turns it back. Zan Syed picks up the win here on a crazy last turn. I was thinking maybe we were going to look at Abrupt Decay on his own Bitter Blossom, something like that. But Coatl into Abrupt Decay.
That was unbelievable. So back and forth, right down to the wire. Lethal into stopping lethal, into lethal on the way back.
And the marathon legacy match between the two concludes. So it is Zan Syed with the win. He takes the first match. We have 2 more to go. But Zan is now up here in the legacy mirror. All right. So we are going to take a short break here as players make their deck selections. The format selection for next round. When we come back, we will have match number 2 of Edgar Magalhaes versus Zan Syed. Welcome back here to the Players' Championship. Edgar Magalhaes and Zan Syed. They have selected their second format here. So how this works is that Zan is, as he wins, Edgar has chosen to be on the play, which means Edgar selects the format.
Right.
No, Zan selects format. I got it right the first time. Edgar, yes, loser's always on the play. So Edgar lost the first round, so he's on the play.
So what's going to be happening
It's modern.
here is we are going to see Edgar on Sultai Urza versus Zan Syed on this Devoted Devastation deck that the Lotus Box has kind of been cutting through the modern portion of this event with.
Right. And this one we feel like is... I think it could be a 2-0 in Zan's favor?
I think this is a matchup where we saw Urza take it a moment ago in the hands of Oliver Tomiko versus Dylan Donegan, but that was the Bant version of the deck, and Edgar's is leaning more into some black reactive cards, and this is something that I think in the pre-board games is going to be good, but post-board is going to end up hurting Edgar, because a lot of what we're going to see from the Devoted Devoted Devastation decks in the post-board games is this Mirroring Crusader plan that they brought originally to answer things like Death Shadow, but it also lines up very well against Oko, Assassin's Trophy, and Elks.
Yeah, the sideboard certainly will come into play. But game one, we'll look at the matchups. Sultai Urza from Edgar. This is was the deck to beat. I think it was, going into the tournament. Most teams had a game plan on this in mind. It is just a mix of some of the most powerful things you can be doing in Modern. So you have Mox Opal, Gilded Goose, Oko, and Urza all in the same deck. The things that ties it together are some pretty good removal spells. Thoughtseize and Assassin's Trophy.
Right, and Edgar being lower on Metallic Rebuke is something that's likely going to come back to bite him here.
Right, he's only one copy of it. He has a full 3 engineered explosives, which against a small creature deck feels like it should play.
Right, the biggest issue here is about time more than it is efficacy. So engineered explosives, cryptic command, these are all powerful cards. It's a matter of not dying on the third turn.
So you mentioned Zan, Syed, Devoted Devastation. This is the proactive deck. Game 1, its plan. It's pretty straightforward. Devoted Druid, Vizier of Remedies, that makes infinite mana. Eladamri's Call usually just finds Devoted Druid, but you can find either half of it. Once you get infinite mana, you will use Duskwatch Recruiter to find Walking Ballista, or just have the Walking Ballista naturally, or use Shalai to spend the infinite mana and win the game.
Right, there are upwards of a quarter of your deck here is something that is going to win the game with infinite mana.
See that, and game 1, I do like Edgar's chances in this matchup. He is on the play here as well.
And that's going to do a lot, especially when despite it being less green than Zan's deck, there's more acceleration on the back of the Mox in his deck.
We saw in our first semifinal, Oliver Tomiko actually lost the Legacy match as well, was able to climb back with wins in Modern and Standard and advance to the finals. Mm-hmm. Edgar looking to do the same.
Yep, back against the wall. He's going to have to run the same playbook if he wants to make it to the finals.
If he wins here, I do think he is a reasonable favorite in Standard.
Right. Edgar has just been putting on a clinic all weekend with his Jund Sacrifice deck.
And actually, if you want to look at Edgar's record by format at the Players' Championship, as of now, this match, he is now 0-4 in Legacy. Has not won a single match with his Legacy deck. He has 1 loss in Modern, and he is 4-0 in Standard. So
5-0.
He's 5. Yes, he's 5-0 in Standard. Yeah, Edgar's basically unbeatable outside of Legacy and has not won in Legacy. But it's a 3-4. In its extremes in this format, if you can go X and O in 2 formats, you can go O and X in the third, and it's fine.
Right. It is absolutely possible to win this tournament without winning a match of one of the formats if you are just good enough at the other 2.
Right. I mean, if you actually lose every match in one format, frequently you will need to, and Edgar did, have to literally win all your other matches. But it's possible.
Yeah, and bright side, when you are just absolutely monstrous at the game, that's not as tall an order as one would expect.
So, Edgar, happy to have the Legacy cards back in the deck box, and here we go for Modern. Both players have kept on 7 here. Trick with Sultai Urza's, get something proactive out. Don't let Zan untap with a Devoted Druid.
Right, that's the spot where it kind of signals that you don't actually have any kind of interaction for the creature combo.
It's interesting, the Devoted Devastation deck actually a bit more straightforward now. It used to be a Collected Company deck, which meant sometimes you'd have to worry about them end-stepping a Devoted Druid into play and just comboing you out of nowhere. They decided their value game plan, rather than having it be Collected Company, is better off as just Oko.
Right. Oko is a fine card in what it does, obviously, but a lot of what this deck wants to do is just be linear and have a more reliable turn 3 kill than try to claw across the finish line with something like Kitchen Finks.
Both players looks like going to have a turn 1 Gilded Goose. And actually for Zan it's Noble Hierarch, but mana creatures on both sides. And for Edgar, ramping out to 3 mana early here. Can't get something like his own Oko going. And if it is, you might see him just Oko up a Noble Hierarch. As it is, it's going to be a second Gilded Goose, another food for Edgar. Mox Opal. Oh, Metalcraft. Unmetalcraft. Here's Oko. Oh, this is reasonable. This is so reasonable.
I don't know. I think this is a little bit closer to Broco.
Yeah, oh, another food, Metalcraft back on and go. So he will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mana on turn 3. And a Planeswalker. I like this.
Oh yeah, nothing like ending your second turn with 8 permanents on the battlefield. Oh, also you have 2 cards in hand still.
Yeah. Devoted Druid from Zan. And Gilded Goose. So, pressure now on. Edgar mentioned does not want to let Zan untap with Devoted Druid. Fortunately has a Planeswalker that can take care of things like that.
Right. And Zan casting Devoted Druid into this Oko here says that he's buckling in for a longer game and has other ways that he plans to win the game.
Right. I mean, you've seen this with the Devoted Devastation deck. When it gets behind an early Oko, it's problematic. Your deck doesn't make instant speed threats. It's hard to assemble the combo with Oko on the board, and it's hard for the deck to attack down Oko.
Right, and one of the sort of locks that this Devastation deck can set up to get out from under an Oko is Giver of Runes plus Shalai. That's something that's going to make it so Edgar can't actually use any of his removal.
And Urza from Edgar.
Okay, here's the pressure.
This is just his deck doing everything. Construct token into play. It is casually a 4/4. No Devoted Druid combos here, says Edgar. And he will pass. At this point, he's just firing on all cylinders.
And would you believe it, Edgar currently has 5 mana available.
Yeah, if he wants to sacrifice those food, he can spin Urza this turn. Now, that's actually likely not going to be his play.
It's not. But he in his deck with Cryptic Command, that card is online despite having no mana available. Or no lands untapped, rather.
Yeah, in a pinch, he could
tap
he
2
could cast
food,
any card in his
tap
deck,
the construct, eat a food with the goose, and then eat Syed with a Cryptic Command.
And this is kind of what you start to see with the Sultai Urza deck. Because it is a combination of so many of the powerful cards in the format, it gets to do things like this, where... I mean, Edgar's board is something that a Legacy deck would have trouble keeping up with.
Right, and nothing here feels particularly hateful, but it's just so much at once.
Elk exalts twice as a 5/5 and attacks, but Oko is just too loyal. It drops down to 2.
Love my 3 mana Planeswalker.
Yeah. Well, it has 7 loyalty now, and it is plussing to remove all your creatures.
So it's generated a permanent Beast Within, taken 5, and is still on the battlefield. Love to spend 3 mana.
Card. Eternal Witness from Zan buys him back a land. For Edgar, now an Assassin's Trophy in hand. And a lot of times what we see in this situation is Oko and Gilded Geese will just continue to make food that will then start being tapped to spin Urza, and over time this gets very out of hand.
Right, now we can see Oko is basically generating a Mox Sapphire every turn.
Yeah, it's a good card. It's a very good card.
And that is at the very least.
At some point, your Gilded Geese can make Mox Sapphires too. You can make 3 Mox Sapphires every turn.
Well, hold on now. Those Gilded Geese are actually... They cost mana to make them, so, you know.
Yeah, they have to work at it. They don't just go in for free. 5 mana. Looks like Edgar's going to main phase, use that Urza. Shuffles. Gets the top card, may cast it until end of turn without paying its mana cost. May play that card, so if it's a land, he actually can play it. And he will. It's Polluted Delta.
Yeah, why not?
It's like another Mox Sapphire.
And all of these resources are just growing this construct while this is going on. So now we're in a position where if Zan attacks with this 5/5 again, we can see Edgar block with a construct, tap Breeding Pool in the construct, generate a food, and then between the Mox, the 4 food, and the construct, we'll have a 6/6.
And back to Zan we go. End step, right? Edgar can spin Aperture again, if he'd like. He's leaving up Assassin's Trophy. There's just a ton to like here.
Yeah, this is the spot where it's a little unlikely that unless he absolutely has to, we're going to see these Gilded Goose tap for mana anymore. Since when they do that, they're sacrificing future mana.
Yeah, I mean, we might see something like end step. These geese both make food.
Mm-hmm. And here's a good attack from Zan, just getting in with a Gilded Goose, which cannot be blocked by the construct.
Right, it does fly. So that part works. Second main, 4 mana. It is Walking Ballista. That can finish off Oko.
Ooh, okay.
There's not too much that Edgar can do about that. He might lose the Planeswalker. But it's done so much damage with mana that I think Urza might be able to take it from here.
Yeah, this doesn't feel like that bad of an exchange for Edgar.
And Zan says go. And Edgar, see here, going to make a food with one of the geese. Going to make a food with another of the geese. Oh, yeah, the first food tap.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh,
yeah. Yeah, no.
I thought he only had 4 mana. My mistake. He has more.
How could you not realize the power of Tolarian Academy?
Yeah, you know, if Zan tries
Is
to
that
attack...
an Oko in Edgar's hand?
Sure.
Why wouldn't it be?
I mean, he has enough... This is so good. I mean, Zan starts attacking. Oh, we have, 8 million food tokens. It's probably fine.
Oh, yeah, this is a spot where... Or this matchup in general is one in which Zan is either going to deal not close to enough damage, or is going to deal 30 million damage.
Oh, let's just start with a free card. 5 mana for Urza.
Right, you feel bad if you cast Oko from your hand and then flip Oko with Urza, right? Put yourself in a spot to get lucky.
Engineered Explosives on 0. Not sure he wants to use that one.
No, call that the Mox Sapphire. That's the secret. They're all Mox Sapphire.
Everything's a Mox Sapphire. Eventually, this construct just wins.
Right, here we're starting to see Edgar get to the spot where this is just a big enough construct. Now he wants to find a cryptic command to tap Syed's team.
And then he wins.
Exactly.
A fresh Oko makes more food.
Call that the Mox Sapphire.
just keep it going. That's
We like to have fun.
This deck has a lot of Mox Sapphires.
Call that the Mox Sapphire.
Wow. And Zan has to know that he's a cryptic command away from being out of this game.
Right. And that's why Edgar's holding up this Polluted Delta and trying to avoid using it, is because it also represents a Mystic Sanctuary if Edgar can find that first cryptic command.
Yeah. Do you think he even needs to Sanctuary loop the cryptics? Or you mentioned the construct being so big that might not even be a thing anymore.
So it feels like Edgar has infinite permanence, but he doesn't literally have 14 yet.
We see Shalai from Zan. Now, Edgar does have an Assassin's Trophy in hand, and that might earn it.
Yeah, I have a feeling that Edgar is not going to have an Assassin's Trophy in his hand for very long.
We see 4 mana Cryptic Command. Counter. Now he has to do some math. Is it counter tap, counter bounce? I mean, I guess he can just counter and then go fetch up the Cryptic Command. Yeah, it was counter, tap the team. End step. You think he's drawing Cryptic Command again?
Oh, I would imagine that Cryptic Command is going to find its way on top of the library here.
Does.
Especially since Oko doesn't have to necessarily make another Mox Sapphire.
Yeah. Mystic Sanctuary, what will he choose? Oh, hit his Cryptic Command. Right, so you can activate to turn the food token, or turn a goose into an elk. Attack with the construct and the goose. That's a lot of damage. It might be enough. It's real close.
Roughly
If not,
several damage here.
yeah. And Sans says that's
Yep,
we're
just
good.
count it up.
If it wasn't close enough, if it wasn't lethal, it was close enough. And Edgar, a convincing walk to game 1.
Right, and in that spot, Edgar just gets to tap Zan's team, bounce Mystic Sanctuary over and over and over.
Right. So, sideboards for the players. On Edgar's side, the main deck here is pretty good. And actually, the sideboard's pretty good too.
So the sideboard's nice. Dark Blast is going to be good against all of those X1s. Drown in the Lock, Fatal Push, good anti-combo cards on this side.
Dark Blast is an excellent one here. It feels like Edgar should be ahead here. Now, he doesn't improve post-board as much as Zan Saya does, and that's because of the card you mentioned, Mirren Crusader.
Right, so taking a look at Zan's sideboard, Mirren Crusader is just a card that Edgar's going to struggle to get without actually just using something like Engineered Explosives. Then, Zan also has Collector Oof, which turns off Engineered Explosives, and Veil of Summer, which counters a lot of those same cards that Mirren Crusader is going to find itself being good against.
Right. Zan, these 8 cards in sideboard are fantastic. Count 1 mana counter spells, 2 mana Stony Silence on a creature, and then Mirren Crusader. So Zan has the tools, not necessarily to combo anymore, but to compete.
Right.
And you mentioned Mirren Crusader, how the ways that Edgar can deal with it, to me, look like he can blow it up with Engineered Explosives, he can outfight it with a Construct.
Right, and he can counter it on the way down with a Cryptic Command or a Metallic Rebuke.
But that's about it.
Exactly, and a lot of those just get much worse with Veil of Summer. When Veil of Summer gets involved. We saw yesterday on the winning end, Dylan Donegan making it to the top 4, beating out Colin Roundtree with just turn 2 Mirren Crusader off of a Noble Hierarch, turn 3 what made it so that nothing could be cast by Colin Roundtree with Knight Captain of Eos.
Both players checking then for the sideboard. So when Zan has that triple Mirren Crusader, this sort of game plan, I mean, how committed is he still to the combo?
You still want to have access to it. I imagine a lot of what we're going to see getting cut here are maybe some of the things like Finale of Devastation, these more expensive, clunky spells that just take a big mana investment against a deck where you don't want to have to take the time to do that.
Yeah, 4 Finale Devastation, 4 Eladamri's Call for Zan. I mean, they do all find Mirren Crusader if it's just about Mirren Crusader,
point.
but
Sure.
I think you're right that there's maybe he doesn't want to do that. I'm actually looking at the card Oko on Zan's side. It's probably just too good to ever remove, but it's not really on plan for him.
The thing about Oko is it checks one of the boxes that can answer Mirren Crusader and that you elk the construct.
Checks the box of being Oko.
Yep. Yeah.
Is Oko? Check. Oh, okay. It probably does something in this matchup.
Oof, I love a fairy that gives antlers to things.
Yeah, we see. I guess what I'm looking at then to leave maybe are cards like Yeah, some of these finds, maybe even some Giver runes at some level might not be great here.
Sure, I think the big draw to that card is that can get you past green blockers.
Okay.
Trimming on some number of combo pieces might be fine. That's to say your payoff cards,
Yeah.
like Eternal Witness, loses a little bit of value, so I'm not super high on keeping both copies of that card in. You could look at the second copy of Duskwatch Recruiter as being underwhelming when things get super gummed up and you actually just need to be playing to the battlefield. I am also not super high on having 3 copies of Vizier of Remedies if you think that comboing is going to be more difficult.
Right. Especially when you see cards like Dark Blast and Edgar sideboard. I don't really want to play that. Interestingly, there are enough X1s, I was going to say. Gilded Goose is an 0-2. Giver of Runes is a 1-2. These random extra points of toughness that you're starting to find on cards do matter.
It's a good thing that they can survive Ridden 6 pings.
Yeah, that's very true.
What would we do if Gilded Goose was a little bit worse? I mean, we'd still play it, but what would we do,
How much worse? I mean, we're already on, list of best Birds of Paradise ever. I mean, it's fighting for the number 2 spot.
Yeah, it might be better than Noble Hierarch. I didn't want to admit it a couple of days ago, and I still don't. I've got a might there.
The only one I know it's worse than is Deathrite Shaman.
It is definitely worse than Deathrite Shaman, and I will fight that to the death.
Well, that one will... it might be coming in at number 2. It's better than Birds of Paradise.
It's definitely easily better than Birds of Paradise.
See for Zan. Yeah, Gilded Goose in his Legacy deck, in his Modern deck, and not in his Standard deck, but it could be.
Exactly.
Zan is playing 12 Okos. No, wait, you can't play him in Standard. 8 Okos, but he would be playing 12 if he could.
Wow,
I
exaggerations.
I just thought it was a breeding pool deck. I'm like, there's got to be 4 Oko in it. It's like, no, wait, it's banned. There would be.
No, it's Simic, not banned. Hey.
Oh. Oh.
We like to have fun. You know what we call that joke?
A Mock Sapphire.
There you go, the Mock Sapphire.
Love it.
Hope you like that joke. I left some gas in it for you.
We might see some Mock Sapphires this match. I could see it happening. Zan on the play here for game 2. Sends back.
And this is him recognizing that the good cards in his deck are so much better than the average, or, well, hopefully there aren't bad cards in his deck anymore. But
Zan's? Yeah.
Right, and the good cards are so important here. That's to say, Mirran Crusader is so important here. Getting an early copy of Giver of Runes, incredibly important here. So any hand that's just average or doesn't have those, he's likely going to just be throwing back, because a Mirran Crusader on its own is going to be worth more than a single card on its face.
Yeah, I mean, his deck does have some bad cards in it. Combo decks are built on bad cards. It's why you need to draw the good half of combo decks, and especially don't want to get into a who can play better cards slog against something like Sultai Urza, where their deck is just full of the
Aether,
best...
Spellbomb.
There we go. That's a bad one.
Everything in the deck's a Mock Sapphire.
Right.
Do you know how much that card costs, Matthias?
I think...
Not zero.
I mean,
Zero's not the answer.
They're pretty expensive.
They are. In that order, pretty and expensive.
Noble Hierarch for Zan. He's kept on his 6.
See, so much better than a Gilded Goose. Zan's opened on it twice. Must be better.
He is playing more Noble Hierarchs than Gilded Goose. There you go. You got it.
Lock it in. I'll start calling people to celebrate. You pop the bubbly.
Yeah. And back to Edgar we go. He has a higher density of removal now that we are post-sideboard.
Right, bringing in, we see a Fatal Push in his hand, likely as Drown in the Lock as well. That card even gets to be a counter spell.
Right.
That can counter a Mirroring Crusader.
Yeah, and I think if he might want to do that, certainly wouldn't want to see a turn 2 Mirroring Crusader unless he has an answer to it. And Mishra's Bauble and Gilded Goose. So,
Honk.
So can you do it? Can we do it? Zan, turn 2. Is it Mirroring Crusader? It is. This is the play for Zan. We talked about, and it has Exalted. This holds Edgar's feet to the fire.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the way that you actually get to attack the opponent.
You see Edgar looking at this Fatal Push in his hand.
What have I done?
Was there a way around it? Now, his Breeding Pool maybe meant he didn't have a way to cast it.
Well, it was off of a Misty Rainforest.
He could have cast it. But Mirroring Crusader is now on the battlefield. And this is a tough spot for Edgar.
Right, he's just aggressively digging for Engineered Explosives at this point.
Yeah, and I guess the only way the Fatal Push works is if you have Fatal Push into Drown in the Lock and you hope that Zan has another fetch land.
Yeah, it's a tall order.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why he didn't pick that route.
Zan could also cast something on 2.
Emery for Edgar trying to dig maybe to an Engineered Explosives, doesn't find one.
Milling 2 copies of Urza here is also a big deal, since that construct that Urza creates is a way to fight Mirroring Crusader the fair way.
Looking back, Edgar's lists ways to interact with Mirroring Crusader. Cryptic Command, Engineered Explosives, Urza, Lord High Artificer. That's it.
Yeah, no, this card is incredible in the matchup, and Zan mulliganed for it for a reason. He knows how strong this is and how difficult of a time it's going to give Edgar.
Yeah, with Exalted, it's set to swing in for 6. Zan has another higher, could make it 8. But swing for 6 comes in. Edgar takes the damage, goes to 11. Only creature that could block it would be this Emery.
2 turns. Yeah. Has to find something.
Do you think there's a way, if Edgar gets something like Oko going, that he can actually just make food fast enough to keep pace?
So he needs to gain a lot of life to do that.
So can he make food at fast enough pace if Collector Oof is in play?
I mean, no.
That's going to make it harder. Now, fortunately for Edgar, he does have removal. The Oof's not likely to stick around. You can still eat the food tokens to make mana with Gilded Goose through Collector Oof.
Correct. That's because that's the Gilded Goose's ability.
And see Edgar end step going to Fatal Push away Collector Oof. Zan could have Veil of Summer, but he doesn't. Oof's down. So Edgar back just needs to find Engineered Explosives. Check the top card of Zan's deck, but he's at 11. The Mirroring Crusader with Exalted does not give him a lot of time. 2 more cards. You know, he was hoping that Emery would pass over some explosives. It did not. So he is still looking.
Edgar really only has about 1 more turn to find Engineered Explosives, because while we've placed a huge emphasis on him rifling through his deck to get access to the card, he still needs to be able to activate it and cast it for 3.
And despite milling over 2 Urzas, Edgar has a 3rd one in his hand. So he'll cast that. He makes a Construct token. The Construct is currently a 2/2. So that's not going to be good enough yet as he passes. It looks like he's going to set up to take another hit off Mirroring Crusader, but maybe can avoid taking the 3rd lethal attack.
Sure. And at this point, Zan is just looking for something that's going to answer this Construct. You know, Emery can chump block, Urza can chump block, but those are not long-term strategies.
Yeah, I mean, on Edgar's side, do you think he chump blocks with Urza this turn? Or is it too soon?
He likely goes to 5. Urza is one of the things that actually lets him find the cards necessary to try and get back into this game, because once he's dealt with this Mirroring Crusader, he still needs to win a game.
Well, here's a way to remove a blocker. Zan, Eladamri's calls on end step for Deputy of Detention. It's a 1 of in his deck. That's almost certain to remove the construct token.
Right, and if Edgar doesn't have something to deal with it with the trigger on the stack, then no matter what, that construct is gone.
Right. Construct will be gone. Now, on the upside, Edgar still has the chance to find and use engineered explosives, but this has taken away his current answer to the Crusader. So it is. The Vidalkin comes in, takes care of the construct, hits another attack for 6. Edgar does not want to chump with Urza. Even though he has no artifacts, he's still not willing to do it. And we pass back. Edgar's to 5. Draws Oko, Assassin's Trophies in hand. These are all cards that do not target Mirren Crusader. Checks the graveyard for his Emery. Emery will bring back Arkham's Astrolabe. He casts it. So call that a Mox Sapphire. See, yeah, it looks like maybe even multiple Okos in hand.
I think that's actually a Frost Sapphire, maybe.
Oh yeah, the Snow Mox.
Exactly. There's no Mox like Snow Mox.
Edgar plays Mishra's Mox Sapphire.
Close.
Close. Yeah. Just rolls off the tongue there. Gilded Goose for Edgar. All these plays mana neutral thanks to Urza. But still hasn't answered the Crusader. He does have 5 mana. He can use that second ability on Urza here.
And again, it just gets into the territory of how long-term is that play, right? He's obviously fighting to survive, but how does that actually happen?
Yeah, I mean, he can, and I want to go back to this question I said earlier. Now that Collector Oof's gone, can Edgar, with enough mana, keep pace just by using food token?
Sure, and now that he has an Urza on the battlefield, that's more likely than it was previously.
And go back over to Zam. Yeah, Edgar can use a Goose to make a food token. Tap that, sack a food token, gain a life. Gain 3 life. Here is the Mirren Crusader swinging in. This is lethal. So Edgar goes to 8. Then he'll go down to 2. Fortunately for them, he faded another Noble Hierarch. That would have made this lethal.
Yeah, absolutely. And 2 is not 0. This is basically his last turn that he has a shot at something like engineered explosives.
Yeah, he has an Oko in hand, so that is a food per turn. As we see Ranger Captain of Eos from Zan. That can find a walking ballista.
It finds a walking ballista,
lethal,
and
right?
Zan can sacrifice it on Edgar's upkeep to turn off engineered explosives.
Plays it for 1.
Alright, so Ranger Captain of Eos has the ability that you can sacrifice it, and until end of turn, your opponents cannot cast non-creature spells. If Zan does this during Edgar's upkeep, he will not be able to engineer explosives.
Yeah, Ranger Captain is in play. Can't really get around that with Urza's ability. Urza gives you the ability to play something, but not out of timing. Its timing window.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Zan will do. Sacrifices the Ranger Captain. Edgar cannot cast non-creature spells this turn. It means that Edgar has to find a construct or create enough food, but he can't make Oko. To Edgar we go. 3 mana.
Looks like he's responding during upkeep.
By using Assassin's Trophy on the Walking Ballista. I guess that makes sense because if he has to check some boxes here, and one of them is if Zan untaps with 4 mana, Edgar loses. So this has to happen. Does this mean Maybe the plan is to do this and then start chump blocking Mirror and Crusader.
Right. It feels like Syed played around a counterspell here, but is punished by removal.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, because Edgar doesn't have an... This might have been a bit too aggressive.
Yeah, I'm not positive that I love this line, because I think there are more removal spells in Edgar's deck than there are counterspells. And other than the one Fatal Push, we haven't really seen one of those this game.
Yeah, it dodges Oko for a turn, which is nice. Zan there is deciding whether to put Edgar to 1 or to get the land. He decides he wants the land.
And that's perfectly reasonable. Outside of something like a Gilded Goose getting involved, there's not a huge difference between 1 and 2, but the difference between, say, 5 and 6 mana with something like a Shalai getting involved is colossal. This also creates a situation where something like an Eternal Witness off the top is just lethal.
Right, through the Walking Ballista. So, with that trophy, now the Ranger Captain trigger resolves. Edgar cannot cast non-creature spells. Does he have anything else to do this turn? You'll see he passes. He can't even use Emery. And it looks like this attack, Edgar's going to now have to start making some chump blocks.
Right, and I would expect the Emery to be the thing that ends up biting the dust here.
And it does. Devoted Druid from Zan. On Edgar's side, I think he missed a ability to make a food token this turn. Is that right?
Well, he had to tap the Astrolabe to cast Assassin's Trophy. He drew the snow-covered swamp for turn, so he did not actually have the ability to do it any other way.
Devoted Druid from Zan. That represents a possible combo some number of turns down the road. It's not on Edgar's radar right now.
Right. When Zan doesn't have any cards in hand anyway, we're several steps away from him comboing.
And we look over at Edgar's side. So 4 mana. He can't make and eat 2 food tokens a turn. He is short.
Right. This is the spot where it feels like the Urza deck has a lot of resources, but a lot of them don't do anything that matter here. Right.
Given time, he could set up an engine that would gain him 6 life a turn and be able to make this happen. He still has an Oko in his hand, but it's still short. You can Oko the Noble Hierarch. Now you're only taking 4 a turn.
But
yeah, then you're chumping with the Urza.
Exactly.
Did you get anywhere? Maybe that's what he does. See what Edgar can come up with here. I guess you actually can't Elk the Noble Hierarch because a 3/3 is just too threatening.
Right, a 3/3 is not nothing when you're at 2.
So we will see Oko makes a food token.
And from this point, we see Edgar just saying, all right, what can I do to just not die? It's all about getting another untapped step.
Swing in for Zix. Is it Urza's turn to block? Makes another food token, and Urza is down. Zan passes. We go back to Edgar.
All right. And we just see this pattern of Urza being able to barely cling on.
So Edgar, Emery had to block the Crusader. Then it was Urza's turn. Now he only has green cards left. No more blockers. He's at 2. He's developed his mana, but that last chump block with Urza actually cost him mana.
Exactly. That was one of his big resource engines at this spot. So we're going to see Edgar. He's able to gain 6 life here and effectively fog the Mirroring Crusader for a turn. But what is that actually worth?
Yeah, he's thinking right now about trading for, it looks like, a creature that can block.
Probably Deputy of Detention.
Right. He's going to trade the Astrolabe away. Those food tokens actually are more valuable than the Astrolabe at this point.
Yeah, Edgar has his mana fixed just fine, but what this Deputy is going to do is represent a fog that isn't going to cost Edgar a bunch of mana. If him sacking those 2 foods is not actually getting him anywhere, other than buying him another card off the top.
And we now have collected the whole gaggle of geese. 4th one in play for Edgar. Gets that food token.
Press G to gaggle.
Look at them, just all neatly arranged up there. Right in a row. Gotta get your geese in a row.
4 gilded geese.
And this time Deputy of Detention blocks the Crusader, and we see Giver of Runes from Zan.
Oh my.
All right.
Okay, so this
If there's a removal,
this
it'll happen.
Mirroring Crusader has so much protection now.
Right. Yeah. I do think with Noble Hierarchy, Edgar goes to 1. He's got to remove Giver of Runes if he has a removal spell left.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
No other choice. Fetches up Mystic Sanctuary. Is there a removal spell in his graveyard? I mean, he'd like to have Cryptic Command. Does he have a Cryptic in the graveyard? No, he doesn't. He has a Fatal Push. You know, if he had a Cryptic Command here, this might actually work.
Right. That would just be something where he could tap the team, bounce his Mystic Sanctuary over and over, and generate something with Oko.
Right. As it was, he had to use Fatal Push.
And honestly, this has been a really impressive series of just Edgar holding on.
Right.
Zan had a very early copy of Mirroring Crusader that has dealt an absolute ton of damage here.
Right. One of the geese gets elked here. And now we see another Oko. And another goose turns into an elk. But none of this stops Mirroring Crusader. He's going to swing with both.
This is Edgar turning the corner.
Hold on. Okay, so Zan's at 7. I guess, and Edgar has a food token, so he's decided he wants to race. Oh, this is interesting.
Oh, my.
He has Assassin's Trophy and Fatal Push, and he's decided that's the way forward. You see Fatal Push on Giver of Runes. Swings, and he says, go. He is at 7. He's not actually dead here. And what he's doing is he's turning to Zan. He's saying, you know, if you want to attack me with this, I'm going to hit you back.
Right. Edgar knows that this is not a game that he can win long enough. He needs to close the door and do it now.
And what about this? Zan has to take a turn off and attack down Oko.
Mm-hmm. This absolutely makes sense. He'd be facing lethal on the way back and have to chump block.
Both elk swing. Oh my goodness, Edgar, this is excellent. Zan down to 1. And there's Gilded Geese. There's enough mana to suddenly make this food and stay alive. What? Edgar loses the whole board. Zan draws a card with Horizon Canopy. This is incredible. Did Edgar pull off the win here?
Zan just needs another Noble Hierarch, a way to rebuy this Walking Ballista, something that can block these elk.
There has been, since turn 3 of the game, a 3/3 Mirroring Crusader attacking every turn, and I don't think it's going to be good enough.
Look at this. Edgar's actually starting to just make food, crack the food, getting to a safer life total.
Going to 10, end step, tap 4, go to 10. And Edgar just turned the corner without any of his haymakers. There was no Cryptic Command. Couldn't stick an Urza. Couldn't get Engineer Explosives on Mirroring Crusader. There's no way out here, but now we see Emery from Edgar.
And this is just going to get him so many cards.
And there's the Engineer Explosives. This is lethal next turn.
Yeah, that gets so many blockers out of the way, too.
Veil of Summer. Cycled for Zan because Emery was cast. Does it again. These cards that came out of the board, they aren't playing here.
He sees the Engineered Explosives. He knows the writing on the wall.
He's got to do something. Eladamri's Call, is that it? That plays here. So Eladamri's Call means that there's going to be infinite mana. He can get Vizier. He doesn't have an outlet. He has to draw a way to win, right?
Right.
Is there anything else he can get? Something different, something that keeps him alive. He doesn't have a second ballista. It's not even good enough if he did. He's looking at... Oh, and this is a numbers game. He's looking at Eternal Witness. Okay, so what he's thinking is it's less likely to draw... You don't want to get the Vizier. You get the Eternal Witness, and you hope to top deck the Vizier. It's actually a better numbers play. I like that. You know, because he's either top decking towards Shalai and Witness, or he's top decking toward his Viziers. And it depends how he's sideboarded, how many Viziers he's kept in, as to which one mathematically the right play is.
Right. This one just lets him cut either direction. Yeah. If he hits a kill con, he can get call into Vizier, and if he draws a Vizier, he can call into kill con.
Now the question is, did he do it? He drew for the turn.
Really just giving himself every out to end up stealing this game here, that he was so far ahead that it looks like Edgar is going to take from the jaws of defeat.
I mean, Zan on the play, a turn 2 Mirren Crusader that never got answered. This was supposed to be, you said that the deck that Zan was playing was set up with low impact cards and high impact cards. He had the highest impact card. He had it at the earliest possible moment. This was supposed to be how he wins.
Right, and we see him doing some math, so I don't think he's drawn nothing. I think he might have it.
3 mana. Eternal Witness. Grabbing. It can grab Walking Ballista. I mean, if he has Vizier here, then he gets it. Does he have one? If he has another Eladamri's Call, it works. He does not. It's just a Ballista for 3. But maybe that's enough to buy him a turn.
That kills an elk.
Yeah, you can block an elk and shoot an elk. So that might be enough right now. Here's Mirren Crusader attacking. Edgar either goes to 4 or blocks with Emery. But 4 is not... Oh, goodness. Ooh, this is interesting. I mean, I guess Edgar still has this trick where he can gain 3 life with a Gilded Goose. So he probably can gain 3 and then just...
You can probably just take it.
Yeah, and he does. He goes to 4. Devoted Druid untaps once to make a mana. Taps again to cast Gilded Goose. Making a food says go. And a damage on Emery. 2 damage on Emery. Edgar, that goes into the bin, so no engineered explosives. And now it's back to being close. What does Edgar do? He certainly can gain some life. I don't think he can attack for lethal. There's too many blockers in the way. There are 3 blockers.
I believe his last card is an Assassin's Trophy.
So he either gains the 3 life or he trophies something.
Correct, and it feels like it all comes down to this.
And looks like he's going to go to gain 3. Yeah, Zan had that last blocker. He's actually just going to not gain the 3 now, he's going to make 2 food.
Sure.
Okay, so he has a removal spell. He has 2 attackers. There's 3 blockers. Back to him we go. It is a land. I don't think that plays. He has a second Mystic Sanctuary, but with no way to draw a card. That doesn't do too much. He has 3 food, so maybe he can survive another turn.
He can likely survive, but Zan getting to untap with this Ballista is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, so here's a swing with the Elks and 2 chump blocks. And now I think on Zan's side, on Edgar's side, you have to trophy the Ballista.
Right. If you do that, you come back to that board state we were at a moment ago, where it's Edgar and his food generators against whatever Zan has.
And that's going to be the play. So here's trophy on Ballista. Zan shoots upstairs Edgar to 3, but Edgar has 4 mana up. He is at a virtual 9. Plays a land, says go. And remember, there's a second Mystic Sanctuary in Edgar's hand. So on the untap, he has lines. He doesn't have a Cryptic Command in his graveyard. That would, of course, be what he'd like to see.
Correct.
But a removal spell might be good enough.
Yeah, just fatal pushing one of these blockers is lethal. So it feels like Zan, if he doesn't draw something, has to hold back.
Swing for 6. Zan continues to attack, but Edgar goes to 6, goes to 9, down to 3. Vizier of Remedies. It's infinite mana for Zan, but he can't do anything with it.
One turn late.
But there's a food token in play. So Edgar doesn't get the Mystic Sanctuary.
Okay.
Because it's not a lethal attack yet. He's
thinking on his upkeep. He might get that Mystic Sanctuary here.
Right. I mean, he wishes there was a Cryptic Command in that graveyard. But there is not. Edgar going to go to 2. Does he? I mean, it's a removal spell, right? That's all he can get out of the graveyard. Fatal Pushes and Assassin's Trophies.
And this is the power of this deck. Even fetch lands are resources.
He needs 7 mana to pull off this play, and he has exactly that. So we'll walk through it. Swings, it's 2 chump blocks from Zan. So Edgar needs 1 mana to Fatal Push, 2 mana to make a second food, and then 4 mana to sacrifice both the food. And now with Noble Hierarch on, it actually only needed 1
Crusader's
food.
treading water now.
Yeah, now it's not even ahead. And I think, wow. Zan, land, pass, Edgar, go to A, go make some food. No cards in Zan's hand. 2 Elk.
Okay, so Zan has a food here.
Right. Okay, so it's a turn.
Well, if
Edgar can't attack.
Right.
They both swing. Crusader blocks one of the Elk. Zan gains 3, takes 3, stays at 1. Edgar, 3 mana.
Oh my god, another Oko.
And that's going to make a lethal attacker again. It's going to turn one of the geese into an elk. Edgar passes. Zan draws the card. What a game.
He's looking at his lands.
Edgar Magalhaes, what a comeback. And we are going to go to standard 2-0. Edgar with the win. Game 2 beats... I don't even know what happened.
The drama of that game.
Yeah.
Zan he had his sideboard plan, but Edgar turned the corner on a dime.
And this is showing Edgar is just this whole match showing us something else. You saw in Legacy taking a horrible board state, almost winning a game he had no business winning, and then again in Modern, this time he does it.
Right. Just his ability to turn the corner in these sort of tactical ways where we were thinking, how does he stay alive? And he just goes, by killing my opponent.
It feels like Edgar's losing every game, and then he wins some of them.
Exactly. It's unbelievable.
All right, so we are going to go to break. It is now a match apiece. They're going to decide this with their standard decks. For Edgar, you got to be happy he hasn't lost a single match of Standard.
Yes.
So stay tuned when we come back. It'll be the conclusion of our semifinal of Edgar Magalhaes and Zan Syed.
Bringing friendly competition and exclusive prizes to stores worldwide, Game Night features Hoot to Kill tokens and sleeves all throughout December. Head to starcitygames.com/GameNight and find a store near you.
Welcome back to our Sunday coverage of the Players' Championship. We're here in our semifinals after quite a comeback. Edgar Magalhaes evening the score with Syed.
Unbelievable, and that really just speaks to Edgar's strength as a player. We saw Zan get the card that felt like it was just an I win button in the matchup, and Edgar found a way to maneuver around that without ever answering it.
So to recap, we have here with a trip to the finals on the line, we have Edgar Magalhaes and Syed playing right now. First two matches have split 1-1. We saw a 2-0 win in Legacy. Or it's actually 2-1 win. It got pretty close with Zan and Edgar, but Zan did come out on top.
Right down to the wire. Both games. Both matches.
So Zan does pick up the win there. It's a big one. Then we go over to Modern. Edgar cruises to a Game 1 win. Zan has a killer sideboard for the matchup, boards into it. Everything is going according to plan. And then I don't even know what happens.
It really just felt like things gradually slipped away. We saw Edgar go to 1 several times, and Gilded Goose just kept him in it.
Right. Never able to remove a Mirran Crusader, took hits for it every turn starting from turn 3 to the end of the game. Never removed the Mirran Crusader. And somehow with a mix of elk tokens, sacrificing food, gilded geese, a lot of chump blocks, did end up with the win.
Right, and that in a lot of ways just speaks to the power level of this sort of food engine, where we saw 2 of the leftover geese get turned into things that could attack, so they're attacking. Oko has made them into real threats, and then Gilded Goose is just gaining life to where it's effectively a 12-point life swing every single turn from a bunch of 1-drops.
All right. So this means we're going to have a third match. It's going to come down to standard. It's both semifinals have done that so far. And this is right where Edgar wants to be. We're going to start because he hasn't lost in standard. We mentioned earlier Edgar having some of the swingiest tournament, complete miss in Legacy, but basically perfect in the other 2 formats, Modern and Standard, and that's what he's going to hope to do to get his spot in the finals.
Yeah, and we've seen Edgar cleaning house with this all weekend. Edgar back against the wall at the end of day 1. Grudge match against the reigning Players Champion, Joe Lissette. Wins. Yesterday, win into today's competition. And now his finals berth is resting on that same deck.
All right, so Jund Sacrifice from Edgar Magalhaes. This has looked like the deck to beat in Standard. Well, certainly it has when Edgar's been playing it. A high synergy deck. It starts out with a lot of moving pieces, but what has been really impressive about it is it has a mix of removal, early game plays, and also late game inevitability. It can win early, it can win late. You see this, the Sacrifice engine is going to be Cauldron Familiar, Witch's Oven, setting up things, and eventually curving into Corvold the Cursed King at the top of the curve.
Right, and you mentioned it being able to play at both ends. There are the games where we've seen 10 lands, Trail of Crumbs, drags it into the late game, and we've seen turn 1, Cauldron Familiar, turn 2, Double Witch's Oven, turn 3, Mayhem Devil, turn 4, Mayhem Devil kill you. Right.
So he will be up against Syed, who, and this is, I think, in Zan's spot, didn't really want it to come to this match. On Simic Ramp, this is the deck that Zan's team has played. It, in Standard, has not had a particularly good record.
Right. Simic Ramp is a deck that looked pretty impressive last week, but watching it this weekend has definitely felt like the leak for Team Lotus Box's kind of team lineup.
We saw this yesterday in the Standard bracket. Simic Ramp, all of the Lotus Box players playing it collectively have 2 match wins with it. Now, Zan is one of those 2 wins, but even then, Zan yesterday, medium day in Standard, had to rely on his Modern deck to carry him into the finals.
Exactly. This is not what you want your tournament life resting on.
So that said, his deck is powerful. Ramping into some big plays here. It does have some game, but it's going to be a tough one. Zan is on the... Zan does get to be on the play for this, which I think will help.
That's a big deal for a ramp deck where mana advantage is the name of the game.
And we'll see if that's going to be enough. We'll head down to our feature match where we have our third and deciding game. And this one, these 2 players have not played in Standard yet. If Zan makes the finals, he has already played Oliver Tomiko once in Standard. Oliver was the winner there. But on the play, Zan going down to 6 cards.
Edgar keeping his kind of missing black mana every match we've seen him play. But this deck is so good at churning through its deck that something like Trail of Crumbs basically makes any hand with lands pretty close to a snap keep.
Yeah, we look at that. So the window for the Simic Ramp deck feels like it's around turns 3 to 5. You know, if Zan can get a turn 3 Nissa who shakes the world, he can do something big enough to maybe win. But it almost seems like it takes something like that.
Exactly. It's Nissa who shakes the world that defines the game-winning draws from the Simic Ramp deck. Something like Cavalier of Thorns is normally going to be good at, say, gumming things up, making it difficult for Edgar to attack, but that's not exactly Edgar's MO.
We saw yesterday Edgar defeating a game where his opponent had made a Nissa emblem, ultimated Nissa, then cast a high 10-10 and 6-6 Hydroid Krasis in the same turn, and then lose.
Yep.
Once Edgar's deck gets going, it is going to overpower Zan.
Exactly, and a lot of that is just on the back of Mayhem Devil and Corvold, the Faker King. These are sort of your payoff cards for having all of these sacrifice synergies.
Zan has kept on 6 here.
And him choosing to mulligan is him knowing he needs a specific subset of draws in order to compete with Edgar's deck.
And here we go. Game 1 between the 2. For the Lotus Box Standard deck, I mentioned the Lotus Box hitting with great decks in Legacy and Modern. Standard was what they didn't want it to come down to. This list is the same one you saw Dylan Donegan play up against Oliver Tomiko. Fairly straightforward. Not much interaction in the main in terms of any sort of counter spell. He has 1 Agent of Treachery to interact, otherwise just looking to ramp.
Right, this is just the plan where they want to just go over the top and assume that will be good enough.
And how about this, Edgar? Turn 1 Cauldron Familiar, turn 2 double Witch's Oven. I see what we're doing.
Love a good life-linking Tormenting Voice.
So each of these ovens basically is going to tap 2 drain for 1 Zan down to 16. So Edgar will swing for 1, drain for 2. This is just a burn deck now. Zan down to 15.
That's fine. Look what Zan's doing.
How about another oven? How about a Lava Spike every turn? Can you beat that?
I gotta say that I like what Edgar's cooking.
This is one of the best draft decks I've seen in a while. 3 more Zan down to 12.
Yeah, and this is a spot where it feels like Zan kept a hand that was missing something, was banking on drawing a ramp spell or something like that, and just missed.
Yeah, in a ramp deck, you don't ever want to go to 5. Your deck doesn't work. If Zan just kept a land-heavy hand and said, I have to draw into the cards, it looks like what he's done. But at this point, it's hard to see what else he could do. Cavalier of Thorns is now the play for Zan, but his first play being on turn 5 is going to be problematic. These Witch's Ovens don't need the attack step to work.
Right, Zan is at a virtual 8 here.
With the trigger on, it is Murderous Rider.
Ooh, this is some heads-up sequencing from Edgar.
Yeah, he does that before Zan has any cards in the graveyard, which means that Cavalier is actually just going to get killed.
I'm a big fan of this line because it is worth an extra attack from the cat as well.
Right, it's 1 more point of damage. And we're so close to not needing any points. I mean, if Edgar top decks Mayhem Devil, we're done.
GG.
Temple of Mystery for Zan. Scry 1 on the top. That's going to the bottom, but we see end step. Zan down to 8. Edgar's life total continues to rise thanks to Cauldron Familiar.
Appreciate the shortcutting here.
Down to 7. And it's almost lethal here. We see Murderous Riders that is cast, end step, drain 3, untap, drain 3.
1 point away.
Yeah, 1 Cauldron Familiar, 1 Mayhem Devil, 1 anything.
1 combat step.
1 combat step.
Zan needs 2 blockers and Edgar to have nothing.
Nissa who shakes the world. Now the play. And even if Zan stabilizes somehow here, the problem is going to be that he's just going to live this entire game 1 Mayhem Devil or Cauldron Familiar away from dead. And he will need a large Hydroid Crisis.
Exactly. He needs to just find a bunch more forests because this Nissa is not actually producing that much additional mana when you see 2 islands, 2 Temple of Mysteries on the battlefield. And, Hydroid Crisis, Edgar's at 27. It's not exactly slamming the door shut.
Zan untaps an island. 2 mana will be for an Arboreal Grazer, floating 1, no land into play, says go. Edgar drains Zan down to 4 with the ovens. Zan has covered the attack step. Did he buy himself a turn? Nope. Here's Casualties of War. Blockers are gone. Attack is in. Witch's ovens go off, and Edgar takes the first game.
And that's just... I don't want to call it a beatdown draw. But
it's a burn draw, right?
But it is one that actually closes the door, right? Rather than playing a value game, Edgar just says, okay, well, you're going to lose 3 life a turn, and if that means if it takes you more than 6 or 7 turns to kill me, you will literally die.
Yeah, Edgar just with a stack of, Goblin Fire Slingers. Just 1 mana cards that tap to ping, and if you get enough of them, it's going to work. A blue-green deck can't really answer it. There's no removal.
Exactly.
So, game 1 goes to Edgar, and as we go into later games, Edgar's got some tools.
Right, so Noxious Grasp and Duress, those are the big pickups here, because those are things that are going to be able to actually answer any of the Aethergust-esque cards that Zan's bringing to the table, but most importantly, Noxious Grasp. I want to look at that card. Mm-hmm. We see Nissa, who shakes the world, Risen Reef, Cavalier of Thorns, all these big, impactful spells are green cards. They're green permanents that Noxious Grasp takes care of for 2.
Right, so those come into play. We look at Zan's sideboard, and this is something you say because Zan is an excellent metagamer, and we saw that with his Legacy choice and his Modern choice. This one didn't work.
Correct.
He showed up with this. He was ready to fight the mirror match. He wanted to ready to fight Fires of Invention, ready to fight against Simic Flash to a point, and had nothing for this matchup.
Right. The big things that we'll see coming in here are Aethergust, because it can hit Mayhem Devil, it can hit Corvold, it can hit some of the other things that we might end up seeing. Those are the big ones, though. And we might see Zan try something off the wall. Say,
Mystical
Lovestruck Beast, Mystical Dispute can help pick apart some synergy pieces. Aethergust also goes after Trail of Crumbs, but overall, there's nothing too incredibly impactful out of the sideboard here.
No, and then you see these 4-4-4-3 sideboards, especially with 11 cards that list a specific color. It means that your sideboard utility is going to have a wide range from great to terrible. We saw Dylan Donegan playing against Oliver Tomiko have an 11-card sideboard to board, and all the cards came up, but Zan is not on that end of things.
Exactly. This is the nightmare scenario, where things get better for your opponent post-board, you're down a game, and they don't really get much better for you.
Winner of this goes to the finals to face Oliver Tomiko.
Edgar 1 game away. Zan, nothing more he can give up.
Zan will get to be on the play again here. That last hand, what I like on Zan's side, I mean, it looks like why would he have the terrible keep? And I actually really like his keep in the sense of, if you think you have a bad matchup, you want to keep high risk, high reward hands.
Right.
Because your fair game doesn't work. Mulliganing to 5, it's very rare, especially in ramp deck, to find any 5-card hand that has high reward.
Right, so that's a spot where a 5-card hand is frequently going to need multiple pieces in order to play the game plan that you want to execute. It felt like that 6-card hand was missing 1 piece.
Right.
And if you can just find, say, a Leafkin Druid, that hand probably looks way better.
Right, so yeah, some 5-card hands are low risk, low reward. A 6-card hand, but the reward isn't high. You just, because a ramp deck needs so many pieces. Maybe a 6-card hand, you say, hey, if I have these 2 draws off the top, I get there in I have a very great draw.
Exactly. There are a lot of things that if, say, Zan's top card was an Arboreal Grazer, was a Growth Spiral, that game is completely different.
Game 2 now underway. We are going to see both players on 7. In Edgar's opener, he starts with Gilded Goose. We also see one of those sideboard Noxious Grasps in his opener. Right,
and we're likely going to see Edgar settle in for a longer game when he has more of these reactive cards that favorably exchange with Zan's.
Leafkin Druid for Zan. And Zan actually has a pretty good value ramp out here. We see in his hand both third land, Risen Reef, and Nissa Who Shakes the World. So there's actually a lot of good play here. It could be picked apart by something like a Duress, but it's not too bad. And I like this Edgar, recognizing he's against a blue-green deck, just throws out Mayhem Devil while the shields are down.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the idea is we see these Noxious Grasps hiding out in Edgar's hand. That means he's going to be able to undo whatever Zan's next turn is. More than likely, he just wants to be able to apply pressure while he's doing that. Otherwise, he's just kind of bridging both players to a later game. And that will favor Zan if Edgar doesn't have something like Trail of Crumbs going.
Yeah. And you see, because of that Mayhem Devil, Zan actually had to Growth Spiral here. I think ideally he would have cast the Risen Reef in his hand, but he doesn't want to do that right into Mayhem Devil.
Right. When you see a Gilded Goose on the other side of the battlefield, you have to assume that this Risen Reef is just DOA.
Yeah, something can get sacrificed. It's not hard for Edgar to pull off. So we see Leafkin Druid, and then rather than the Reef, it's a second Leafkin Druid from Zan. Makes sense. Hand right now is Reef and Nissa and land. And Mayhem Devil attacks Zan to 16. I mean, there are still worries, though, from Zan's side. A second Mayhem Devil from Edgar, and maybe nothing matters.
Right, that's the spot where everything's dead on arrival.
Stomping Ground from Edgar. Witch's Oven leaves up some mana for the Goose, and says go.
Right, this also represents Noxious Grasp.
Right. To Zan we go. He has Nissa in hand, draws a land. He might sense a Noxious Grasp, but it's unclear what he can do about it.
Exactly, and you can either sense it, you could think that this is just producing a mana for Gilded Goose to try and make a Corvold next turn. It's really hard to tell exactly what's in Edgar's hand because this deck is so good at just using its mana.
And on Zan's side, he wants to cast all his spells, so he starts with Nissa here, leaving both his forests untapped. Nissa targets the land. Does Edgar Noxious Grasp here? He could. It would take Zan off a mana, and he will. It doesn't mean if Zan has a second Nissa, he actually couldn't cast it.
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3, 4. This untaps as a 3/3. Is that 5? Is it a double Nissa from Zan? What a turn it would be.
Ooh. Even just making those 3/3s is pretty strong.
Right.
If Edgar ends up killing the other Nissa as well.
And it's not Nissa, but it is a 5-drop Cavalier of Thorns from Zan.
And without a cat on Edgar's side to loop with this oven, this is a real threat.
It's a real threat, and Zan mills over one of those quasi-duplicates. So a lot of power on the board here. Another Cavalier in the waiting. It's a great draw. We have seen Edgar overpower these.
Right.
As weird as it looks.
Yeah, this is a spot where Edgar, we see a Corvold hiding out in his hand. He's going to want to develop that as quickly as possible.
Right, and he didn't make the food that turn because of Noxious Grasp, so he is at least a turn away from Corvold. But in this matchup, if Corvold survives and Edgar untaps with Corvold, it almost doesn't matter what Zan does.
Correct. It'll just be so easy to deal 17 when you're getting paid both by Mayhem Devil and Corvold for sacrificing things.
On Edgar's side, Cavalier of Thorns means it's going to be hard for him to removal spell the board. Cards like Casualties of War have now gotten significantly worse. Cavalier can simply rebuy a lot of good things in his graveyard, including another Cavalier.
Oof.
So we'll go to Zan. Edgar he shocks a Stomping Ground into play and says go.
And what we may end up seeing is something like destroying the Cavalier with quasi-duplicate on the stack.
Leafkin Druid from Zan. Now that taps for 2. He'll cast Risen Reef. That one's been in his hand for a while. Wants to do that before the quasi-duplicate, as Cavalier of Thorns is an elemental.
Sure, this just forces action on Edgar's side.
That X1 of Risen Reef may not be long for this game. And I like this from Zen. He actually draws the land off Risen Reef rather than putting it into the graveyard.
That way he can just play it from his hand untapped.
Yeah, I think he can jumpstart with it, which might be what he's looking for.
Ooh.
A swing for 8. That'll work. Edgar down to 9. Has work to do. Zan, Blast Zone. So his hand was Blast Zone, and then that last Forest he just drew. And Blast Zone actually a good amount of defense for him.
Right, being able to blow up Gilded Goose and Witch's Oven is pretty big here.
And he might do that instead of the Jumpstart, we'll see. Unless he has the mana for both, he passes. Okay. Edgar has plays on end step. He'll make a food. 2 more mana. Does he Noxious Grasp anything? I think he has one. He was hoping to get quasi-duplicate with it, but Zan did not cooperate. He might have a Noxious Grasp and a Casualties of War, and if that's the case, he's trying to see if there's any way to make things work. Ends up just untapping. And for Zan, I think he can read into this. Edgar shocked that Stomping Ground into play.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's something that he's not going to do that for nothing, and he's not going to do it just to try and gain a life off the food right there.
The Goose will go ahead and make mana with the food. That pings a land. Corvold is the play. Oh, and now things get interesting. Okay.
Who knows what is about to happen, really?
So, there's a damage on the land. Corvolds enter the battlefield trigger. Says when it enters the battlefield or attacks, sacrifice a permanent. It is not a man. But when you do sacrifice a permanent, Corvold gets a 1/1 counter and Edgar draws a card. And he'll ping something with Mayhem Devil.
And.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's some things. With Corvold on the stack, we'll see whether it's in play. If Xander's going to pop Blast Zone, he might do it now. He lets the trigger resolve. Corvold's in play. Gilded Goose is sacrificed. Pings a second damage onto the land. Draws a card off Corvold. Cauldron Familiar the draw. That's not bad. Also this Fabled Passage, so Edgar goes to 8. Ping trigger from the Mayhem Devil. Finishes off the land. Holds the Corvold trigger on the stack. Zan floats a mana. Counter on Corvold draw, then he finds the land off Fabled Passage. finds a swamp because he drew Cauldron Familiar. And and if you haven't seen Cauldron Familiar plus Witch's Oven plus Mayhem Devil plus Corvold, it's really good.
Plus. I imagine that Blast Zone's going to happen with the Witch's Familiar, or the Familiar on the stack.
Look, these cards all play to the same goal. And it's a good one. Here's Cauldron Familiar. Yeah, and it feels like Zan has to do something here. Enters the battlefield and it drains for 1. No, Zan does not. And this is a mess.
This tells me that Zan's plan likely involves activating Castle Vantress rather than the Blast Zone.
Right. Mayhem Devil swings in for 4 and Zan takes, says go. And notice here that Edgar didn't go for Risen Reef. It shows what he thinks this game is about. He has a powerful enough setup that he's just telling Zan, have as many cards as you want. I don't think any of them beat me.
Right. We believe there's a Noxious Grasp in Edgar's hand. So I feel like the plan at this juncture is to get this Cavalier of Thorns out of the way and then just go for the throat with Corvold.
Right. I mean, at a certain point with Oven, Devil, and Familiar, Corvold can attack, is good at attacking, but doesn't need to attack. It only takes a turn off the clock.
Exactly.
And this is the quick turnaround. The pressure is on Zan. We've reached each of the players' late game, and Edgar's is better.
At this point, if Zan could do something like Finale of Devastation for End-Race Forerunners, I could see him winning here. But that is about what it would take for Zan to win this game. An Aether Gust on Corvold would be huge. Looks like a big Hydroid Crisis.
That is what we're going to see. It's Crisis for X equals 6. But, we've seen some large Hydroid Crises, and they're not as large as Corvold.
No. Corvold's already a 7/7.
And my concern with Zan's side is maybe he's made a blocker here, but Edgar's Snowball is just beginning.
Correct.
So say Zan says, all right, I don't think you can kill me this turn, go. How is Zan winning?
Exactly. He's really trying to get towards just an End-Race Forerunners at this point, but that card's already in his graveyard, so it's going to take a really big Finale of Devastation.
Right, he has to have the Finale for 10. And Zan passes. And now Edgar going to go to work. Cauldron Familiar sacrifices. So this is going to make a food, ping something, draw a card, put a counter on Corvold. And Edgar, instead of going upstairs, it looks like he's going to use them to throw around some of this damage to just start cleaning up Zan's board.
Right. Zan has 16 life. It feels like Corvold is either going to deal most of that damage, or it's just not going to deal 16 with only a Mayhem Devil. So kind of covering those bases and doing little incremental things that'll stop Zan from running away with the game is the line he wants to take here.
All right, so Mayhem Devil trigger kills Risen Reef. Corvold trigger draws a card. Witch's Oven trigger makes a food. We did it. And the thing is, these cards that Corvold draws, it's going to get out of control much more quickly. So say as soon as Edgar draws another Witch's Oven or another Mayhem Devil, these numbers that are happening get scarier.
Correct. The big thing that Edgar wants to pick up here is another copy of Mayhem Devil would just slam the door shut.
Back to every go. 2 mana. He has Trail of Crumbs. But once you start having Corvold in play, it almost feels like you just don't need that anymore.
No, a lot of it is just that it generates a food.
I do
that
like that.
way you can bring your cat back and then just sacrifice the cat to Corvold's ability instead of to the oven, and then you have this fresh food from the Trail of Crumbs and so on.
So with Trail of Crumbs on the stack, Zan said Aether Gusts the Corvold. This was something he drew off of Hydroid Crisis. This will get Zan a turn.
This is a big deal. It might get more than that. 10 is not that much life here.
Right. I'm interested then to see how many Cauldron Familiars Edgar can get back. Questions like that start seeming like they're going to matter.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but there's unlikely that there's enough sacrifices that Edgar can shoot down the Hydroid Krasis, which is what he'd like to do. So with that trigger on the stack, with Aether Gust on the stack, Edgar sacrifices the food to Cauldron Familiar. Mayhem Devil and Corvold triggers are now online. A damage at Leafkin Druid, a card off Corvold, a draw. It was a land. So now Cauldron Familiar trying to get into play. That's going to happen. A drain, Edgar to 11, Zan to 15. Now the Aether Gust is on the top of the stack. But wait, there's more. Sacrifice Cauldron Familiar. A ping, a counter, a draw. The Mayhem Devil trigger. Don't know where it went. We'll see.
Yeah, I would imagine it also went to the Leafkin Druid, but it's difficult to tell at this point.
Those as 03s. Perhaps he can do some work there. Sacrifices the food. Third ping, gets back Cauldron Familiar, drains. The Leafkin Druid now dead. It has taken 3. Corvold draws. Cauldron Familiar, the drain. We already had that one there. What do you think Edgar is trying to find?
I imagine at this point he's just getting resources.
So just wants
actual cardboard.
All right, Aether Gust now resolves. Cauldron Familiar, or Corvold is on top of the deck, and Trail of Crumbs resolves, and we've reached the bottom of the stack.
I'm glad we could go on this journey together.
Yeah, food token's been made. Back to Edgar's main phase.
And
we did
because we know there's that Noxious Grasp in his hand, that may be why he wasn't going after Hydroid Krasis, or even hedging towards it. It's much better to kill the Hydroid Krasis with a removal spell than the Cavalier.
That's the hard part, right? Edgar drew so many lands in that exchange that not only do we know that he has a Noxious Grasp in his hand, but Zan probably knows he has a Noxious Grasp.
Right. This is the spot where you have to assume your opponent has something.
Yeah, another Gilded Goose from Edgar gets another food. And, you know, the Aether Gust was... Krasis into Aether Gust, and this is what it feels like, is one of the best plays Zan could have had. And at the same time, you now look at Edgar's board, look at the life totals, you know the top card of Edgar's deck is a Corvold, and you start to wonder, did you even slow him down?
Sure. Yeah, no, this is a spot where Edgar's so good at actually gumming up combat that a green deck that wins in the combat step is going to struggle unless it has something like in Race Forerunners that just slams the door shut.
Yes, you know, even Agent of Treachery, not a big enough win, and that's why we've seen these ramp decks go for Forerunners and Finale of Devastation. They want cards that win when you do them.
Right, it's not about an advantage all the time. Sometimes you just need to win the game.
Yeah, look, they're looking for... Oftentimes we get a green card that has an ability of, if you have 1,000 mana, do something completely ridiculous that immediately wins the game. And Zan is trying to sign up for that effect.
Right, where's the Craterhoof Behemoth?
Right. We're back on Zan's turn. Edgar with Noxious Grasp up.
And this Blast Zone activation from Syed, actually a pretty big deal. So taking out Witch's Oven is going to do a lot.
So he takes out Witch's Oven, Gilded Goose, and Cauldron Familiar. And you saw that point, that's because Zan sacrificed Blast Zone.
Right. And what this says is that Edgar is likely going to retain priority on instep and sack both foods to this cat in order to draw cards with Trail of Crumbs.
Quasi-duplicate on Cavalier of Thorns. Does Zan Noxious Grasp? That's an interesting one. You got to look at the graveyard. Yeah, that's what Edgar wants to do.
Yeah, it feels like Edgar has to check this one.
What's harder to beat? The card that Cavalier comes back on top? Or a pair of an extra 5/6?
Yeah, 2 5/6s is a really tall order, because you then have to be able to attack through them later.
Yeah. It feels like it's a kind of tall order where the way Edgar beats it is by full comboing.
Exactly.
And if he has enough cards in his hand to do that, maybe he's up to it.
Yeah, maybe it's doable and you just end up Noxious Grasping, say, the Hydroid Crisis. But 12 is not that much life, and Edgar doesn't have an oven anymore.
Right. And he lets the copy happen now. It doesn't want to Noxious Grasp it.
I think this is a big show of patience from Edgar.
And it is Temple of Mystery. Some lands. Risen Reef, Finale of Devastation going into the graveyard. Edgar counting some of the copies of things we have here. But there wasn't another quasi-duplicate dumped. I think that's one of the first things he checks for.
Right.
Temple Scries to the top. Okay. Should be a little concerned on Edgar's side to see that. And now Zan can attack. And it's going to be just Hydroid Graces. Wants to send Edgar down to 6. And now we'll see the Noxious Grasp. Edgar stays pretty high up on life here. He goes to 13 off the Grasp.
Right, and see, this is him just choosing to leave this cat in the graveyard as well because he knows there's a Corvold coming up, and he's going to get so many cards now.
Right. Mana, the biggest limit on what he can do. But if he gets a Corvold and draws a ton of cards and just finds another Witch's Oven in these top cards, something that seems completely reasonable to do, he'll be back on pace.
Yeah, it'll feel like at that point the world is just his oyster.
I feel like the Blast Zone never happened almost. So, you see Edgar saying up, doesn't see a reason to lead on much other than Corvold. I think he's wondering whether he can beat another Aether Gust. Looks like he also has Casualties of War in his hand. But which one does he want to pull the trigger on? I think is the question.
And he's just weighing which land drop to make here. There's so many specific things you need to do right.
So here's Corvold. Puts the Corvold sacrifice trigger on the stack. Before that happens, you see Edgar, he is ready for the big turn. There's a stack of triggers. With that on the stack, sacrifices a food to bring back Cauldron Familiar. Puts the Trail of Crumbs trigger on the stack. This is great. We have the visual representation of
This
Magic
reminds me of
Online.
the second time that Edgar rode a bull. You know what he said? Wasn't his first rodeo.
One damage from Mayhem Devil pointed at Leafkin Druid. So that has resolved. So he's put this...
Oh, he drew a Witch's Oven.
Oh no. Trail, he doesn't want to pay for it. Cat comes back into play. Yeah, he drew off Corvold there. So now the Corvold sack trigger happens. It's going to be on Cauldron Familiar. Second point of damage, second Corvold trigger. Zan at 13. That was off the drain on Cauldron Familiar. And yes, he did draw Witch's Oven, which he will cast. Sacrifices another food to get back, well, damage. Yeah, the sacrifice trigger. He'll put the damage to kill Leafkin Druid. Trail of Crumbs trigger on the stack. Corvold trigger, draws a card. Zan floats some mana. That's unlikely to do much. Edgar can move through combat if he wants. Cat comes back, Zan to 12, Edgar to 15. Hoping to find another oven, I think, is Edgar.
Oh yeah, another oven, other Mayhem Devil.
And he passes. But again, if Edgar gets the untap with all those cards he just got, you have to think he drops one more Mayhem Devil and we're done.
Right. This is a big deal.
And Edgar, the thing is this combo put him back up to 15.
Mm-hmm. Right. And this is the power of the John Sacrifice deck, is that he just has so much reach in this spot to just say, I'll sit back forever, and then when I draw my second Mayhem Devil, you lose the game.
And we go to Zan. It is Finale of Devastation, but it's not X equals 10. It's Finale for 6. Probably just another Cavalier. And actually, wait, is it Finale for 7? It is Agent of Treachery. Stealing Corvold. And Edgar says, no. no. You,
one moment.
Only
please.
one of us gets that card. Sacrifices it to Witch's Oven. And it turns out Corvold cooks for 2 food. Ping there off Mayhem Devil shoots Zan down to 11. A pair of 5/6s now swing in.
This is risky. It's such a bad spot, because on one hand, if you don't attack, how are you ever winning this game? But on the other hand, there's free damage every
time you attack.
Yeah.
I mean, and also Edgar mitigates it so well, right? Like, Called in Familiar will chump block one of these.
Exactly, and that's a lot of the problem.
So, yeah, and Edgar will take 5, chump block with Called in Familiar, go back to doing the combo thing, and Zan can't attack, which means we go back to Edgar. But he drew 3 cards last turn off Corvold. Didn't even have time to use the Trail of Crumbs.
No, he just had other things to do.
And we start the turn with Witch's Oven. Sacrifices it, gets a food. Shoots, and he's just going upstairs. And that is not what you want to see if you're in Zan's spot.
Right. At this point, Edgar has at least 3 more points of damage, just sacking food and retaining priority.
Zan to 9. Brings back the cat. Trail of Crumbs trigger. And he's just trying to find another Mayhem Devil. If he does, it wins. Finds Beanstalk Giant. That's not it.
Little surprised you didn't take Fabled Passage there, since that's worth a point. But this is just a not land card, so I understand when you have a handful of lands why that's attractive.
Retaining priority, he's going to go ahead and sacrifice another food activating Trail of Crumbs. And Zan down to 8, and Edgar misses. Retaining priority, will he do it again? It's a lot of lands in hand for Edgar. And he will. So Zan down to 7.
This is close.
Yeah, Edgar's, I don't know, is it possible he has all lands? That seems so unlikely.
He has a lot of lands and a Beanstalk Giant.
And does not sacrifice the last food. He lets the cat come into play. Zan to 7, Edgar to 16.
I like this because it means that he's going to get to block with the cat. And then still have a food left over next turn to bring it back again.
Forest for Edgar. 5 mana. I mean, did we find another Corvold? No, we didn't. It's Massacre Girl. So, cat is killed here. 2 more mana. Just as close. That's just a blocker, isn't it?
Yep, that's fine. It also put cat in the graveyard so he can activate on the end of Syed's turn. It's also just a 4/4 with Menace against someone at 7.
Someone at 7. Yeah, he's actually trying to put the pressure on Zan to make it so that Zan doesn't attack.
Right.
Every turn Edgar buys himself is more than good enough.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Zan just has to say go. And you're seeing, this is the power here. And Zan says, I know you have it.
Yeah, that's
and
it.
he shakes the hand. So it is the comeback again. Edgar, dominance in Modern, dominance in Standard. It's been his tournament, and he is not letting up. A 2-0 win.